Hello, welcome to the channel. If you're a fan of scary creatures and chilling stories, subscribe to the channel to support us and follow the stories. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching this video from, all because the acrid smell of smoke invaded Mike's nostrils, yanking him from a deep slumber. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal. For a moment, he lay frozen in his bed, the worn sheets tangled around his legs, as his mind raced to catch up with his senses. Fire, he whispered into the darkness, the word tasting of fear on his tongue. Mike threw off the covers and swung his feet to the cold wooden floor. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. No crackling flames, no roar of an inferno. Just the usual nighttime sounds of Yosemite National Park filtering through the walls. The soft hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pines. He fumbled for the lamp on his nightstand, fingers clumsy with sleep and adrenaline. Light flooded the small room, momentarily blinding him. Mike blinked rapidly, scanning for any sign of danger. The cabin looked normal. No smoke, no flames, no hellish orange glow from outside the windows. But the smell, it was unmistakable, growing stronger by the second. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He stood, his ranger's instincts kicking in. Mike moved swiftly through the cabin, checking every room, every potential source of fire. The kitchen was clear, stove cold. The fireplace in the living room dark, its ashes long dead. Even the ancient space heater in the corner, a relic he'd been meaning to replace, sat silent and cool to the touch. Mike's confusion grew with each step. The smoke smell intensified, seeming to seep through the very walls of the cabin. He pressed his palm against the wooden planks, feeling for heat. Nothing. A surge of panic gripped him. If the fire wasn't inside, it had to be outside. Images of the forest he'd sworn to protect, engulfed in flames, flashed through his mind. Mike rushed to the front door, yanking it open without bothering with shoes. The night air hit him like a wall, crisp and clean. Mike stood on his porch, bare feet on rough wood, and stared into the darkness. The forest stretched before him, a sea of shadows under a canopy of stars. No orange glow on the horizon, no distant roar of a wildfire. Just Yosemite at night, as peaceful as ever. Yet the smell of smoke lingered, stronger than ever. "I'm losing my mind," Mike said to the silent trees. "Or there's a fire out there somewhere playing hide and seek." He went back inside, this time to get dressed properly. As he laced up his boots, Mike's mind raced through possibilities. A campfire gone wrong, but he'd have seen the glow. An electrical fire in the park's infrastructure? Possible, but unlikely given the smell's intensity. Fully dressed now, Mike grabbed his radio. Protocol dictated he report any potential fire, no matter how uncertain. He keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Mike Holbrook, over." A moment of static, then a groggy voice replied, "This is dispatch, go ahead, Mike." "Jenny, sorry to wake you. I'm picking up a strong smell of smoke at my location, but I can't find the source. Any reports of fire in the park?" "Over." Another pause. Mike could almost hear Jenny stifling a yawn. "Negative, Mike. No alarms or reports of any kind tonight. Are you sure it's not just someone's campfire?" "Over." Mike frowned, pacing the length of his small living room. "Negative, Jenny. This is stronger, and I can't see any signs of fire from my position. Request permission to do a patrol. Over." "Copy that, Mike. Permission granted. Keep me posted if you find anything. And Mike, be careful out there. Dispatch out." The radio fell silent. Mike clipped it to his belt and grabbed his flashlight. As he stepped out into the night again, that uneasy feeling in his gut intensified. Something wasn't right. The park was quiet. Too quiet. Even the owl had fallen silent. Mike started down the trail that led from his cabin deeper into the park. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating familiar trees and rocks. Everything looked normal, yet that smell of smoke persisted, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As he walked, Mike's mind wandered to old stories he'd heard, tales told by wizened park rangers around campfires, stories of strange phenomena in Yosemite's vast wilderness, of things that couldn't be explained by science or reason. Get a grip, Holbrook, he chided himself. There's a logical explanation for this. There has to be. But as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The smell of smoke was fading now, becoming just a memory, yet it left behind a residue of unease that clung to him like morning mist. Mike paused at the top of a small rise, looking out over the slowly awakening park. In a few hours, this place would be bustling with tourists, hikers, and fellow rangers, all blissfully unaware of the night's mystery. As the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, Mike made a silent vow. He would get to the bottom of this, whatever it took, because if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that where there's smoke, there's fire. And in Yosemite, fire was never, ever to be taken lightly. Little did Mike know as he turned to head back to his cabin that this was just the beginning. The smoke that had awakened him was but a harbinger, the first whisper of a storm that would soon engulf not just Yosemite, but Mike's entire world. As he walked, the forest seemed to watch him, ancient and knowing, holding secrets that were about to unravel in ways Mike could never have imagined. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of dawn mist as Mike began his patrol. Yosemite was coming alive around him, the park's vast expanse stirring with the sounds of wildlife and early risers. But Mike's mind was elsewhere, still puzzling over the mysterious smoke from the night before. He'd barely slept after returning to his cabin, tossing and turning as theories chased each other through his mind. Now, as he walked familiar trails, Mike found himself scanning the ground, trees, and distant ridges for any sign of what might have caused the phantom smoke. "Morning, Ranger Mike." A cheery voice broke through his concentration. A young couple, backpacks laden with camping gear, waved as they passed. Mike forced a smile. "Morning, folks. Heading out for a hike?" "You bet," the woman replied. "Any tips for today?" For a moment, Mike considered asking if they'd smelled smoke, but he hesitated. No need to alarm tourists over what might be nothing. Just the usual. Stay hydrated, stick to marked trails, and remember, if you pack it in, pack it out. As the couple moved on, Mike's radio crackled to life. "Ranger Holbrook, come in." He unclipped the device. "Holbrook here. Go ahead, dispatch. We've got reports of a small fire about 30 miles northeast of your position. Can you head out there and assess?" Mike's heart rate quickened. "Copy that. I'm on my way." The drive to the reported fire location took Mike through some of Yosemite's most breathtaking scenery, but he barely noticed. His mind raced. Could this be connected to last night's mystery? As he neared the coordinates, Mike saw it, a thin column of smoke rising above the tree line. He parked his vehicle and proceeded on foot, the smell of burning wood growing stronger with each step. Breaking through a thicket, Mike came upon the scene. A small clearing, maybe 50 feet across, was scorched black. Wisps of smoke still rose from smoldering underbrush. But something was off. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, crouching to examine the burn pattern. The fire had behaved unnaturally. Instead of spreading outward in a typical pattern, it seemed to have burned in a perfect circle as if constrained by invisible walls. At the circle's edge, the vegetation was untouched, creating a stark line between burnt and unburnt earth. As Mike circled the site, something glinted in the ashes, catching his eye. He knelt, using a pen from his pocket to sift through the debris. Metallic flakes, unlike anything he'd seen before, were scattered throughout the burnt area. "Dispatch, this is Holbrook," he radioed. "I'm at the fire site. It's, unusual. Requesting additional personnel for investigation." "Copy that, Holbrook. What's the situation?" Mike hesitated, unsure how to describe what he was seeing. "The fire's out, but the burn pattern is unlike anything I've encountered. There's also some kind of metallic residue. I'd like a full team out here to document this. Understood. I'll send a crew your way. ETA 2 hours. As Mike waited, he continued to examine the site, taking photos with his phone and jotting down observations in his notepad. The more he looked, the stranger it seemed. No clear point of origin, no signs of accelerant. Yet the fire had clearly burned hot enough to reduce everything within the circle to ash. A sudden gust of wind swirled through the clearing, lifting ashes and embers into the air. Mike watched in disbelief as the embers, instead of extinguishing, seemed to glow brighter. They danced on the breeze, moving with an almost purposeful direction, towards the heart of the park. No, 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 Mike muttered, chasing after the airborne embers. But they were moving too fast, carried by a wind that seemed to ignore the surrounding trees. He grabbed his radio again. Dispatch! We've got airborne embers heading southwest. Alert all units in that direction. This could start new fires. Copy that, Holbrook. All units are being notified. What's your status? Mike was already sprinting back to his vehicle. I'm in pursuit. These embers, they're not behaving normally. We need to contain this fast. As he drove, following the path of the wind-borne embers, Mike's mind raced. The unnatural fire, the metallic residue, and now these seemingly indestructible embers. It all pointed to something far beyond a simple forest fire. He thought back to the smoke that had woken him in the night. Had that been the start of all this? And if so, what exactly had begun? Mike's radio crackled again. Holbrook, be advised. We're getting reports of small fires starting up along the embers path. Fire crews are en route, but we need you to coordinate on the ground. Understood, Mike replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I'm almost at the first reported location. As he crested a hill, Mike saw it. Multiple small fires dotting the landscape ahead, each burning with the same unnatural intensity he'd observed at the original site. Tourists and hikers were scattering, pointing at the sky where embers continued to rain down. Mike pulled over and jumped out, immediately taking charge. Everyone, please remain calm and move towards the visitor center, he shouted, his voice carrying authority that seemed to steady the panicked crowd. As people began to move, Mike approached a nearby fire. Up close, he could see the same metallic flakes glinting in the flames. This was no ordinary fire. It was something else entirely. A fellow ranger, Sarah, jogged up to him. Mike, what the hell is going on? Mike shook his head, eyes fixed on the burning patches of forest. I don't know, Sarah, but whatever it is, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Sarah followed his gaze, her expression a mix of awe and fear. It's almost like the fire has a mind of its own. As if in response to her words, the flames before them suddenly leapt higher, taking on an almost humanoid shape for a brief, terrifying moment before collapsing back into formless fire. Mike and Sarah exchanged shocked looks. In that instant, they both knew. This was only the beginning of something much bigger, much stranger, and potentially much more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. As fire crews began to arrive and the sound of sirens filled the air, Mike steeled himself for what was to come. Whatever was happening in Yosemite, whatever force was behind these unnatural fires, he was determined to get to the bottom of it. The park, and perhaps much more, depended on it. Little did Mike know that his world was about to change forever, as the mystery of the smoke and fire was just the first piece of a puzzle that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the natural world, and his place in it. The sun was setting over Yosemite, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but Mike barely noticed the spectacle. His mind was racing as he sped back to park headquarters, the events of the day replaying in his head like a surreal movie. As he pulled into the parking lot, he saw a cluster of senior park officials gathered outside the main building. Their faces were grim, etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened over the course of the day. Mike took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Ranger Holbrook, called out Frank Jennings, the park's superintendent. We need a full report, now. Mike nodded, following the group into the building. They filed into the main conference room, a space usually reserved for planning seasonal events and coordinating large-scale operations. Today it felt more like a war room. As Mike recounted the day's events, the strange fire patterns, the metallic residue, the seemingly sentient embers, he could see the disbelief growing on his colleagues' faces. "Are you sure about this, Holbrook?" Jennings asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "It sounds far-fetched." Mike leaned forward, his hands splayed on the conference table. "I know how it sounds, sir, but I saw it with my own eyes. Something is very wrong in our park." "Even if what you're saying is true," interjected Linda Reeves, the head of park safety, "what do you expect us to do? We're already stretched thin with budget cuts, and now you want us to investigate some kind of, what, supernatural fire?" The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Mike looked around at the faces of his colleagues, seeing a mix of doubt, fear, and resignation. He realized that he was alone in this, at least for now. Jennings sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Mike, we appreciate your diligence, but unless we have more concrete evidence, our hands are tied. We'll increase patrols and fire watches, but that's all we can do for now." Mike opened his mouth to protest, but Jennings held up a hand. "That's final, Ranger, dismissed." As the meeting dispersed, Mike felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Sarah, her eyes filled with concern. "You okay?" she asked softly. Mike shook his head. "No, I'm not. Sarah, you were there. You saw what I saw. How can they just ignore this?" Sarah glanced around, making sure they were alone. "I believe you, Mike, but you have to understand what we saw. It defies explanation. People tend to rationalize the inexplicable." "But I know," Sarah cut him off gently. "Look, why don't you get some rest? You've been going non-stop since last night. We can regroup tomorrow, figure out our next move." Mike nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Sarah." The drive back to his cabin was a blur. Mike's mind was still churning with theories and possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. As he pulled up to his small home, the familiar sight of the wooden structure brought a small measure of comfort. Inside, Mike went through the motions of his evening routine, barely tasting the quick meal he prepared. As he settled into bed, exhaustion finally catching up with him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and filled with vivid dreams. Mike found himself running through a burning forest, the flames taking on impossible shapes, reaching for him with fiery tendrils. He could hear whispers in the crackling of the fire, words just on the edge of comprehension. Suddenly, Mike jolted awake, his heart pounding. The room was dark, but there was something different. A familiar scent tickled his nostrils, sending a chill down his spine. Smoke. Mike sat up, fully alert now. The smell was unmistakable, stronger than the night before. He jumped out of bed, grabbing his flashlight from the nightstand. "Not again," he muttered, moving swiftly through the cabin. Just like before, there was no sign of fire inside. Mike threw open the front door, the cool night air rushing in. The forest outside was quiet, no sign of the inferno from his dreams. But the smell of smoke persisted, seemingly stronger outside. Mike's eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any hint of flame or smoke. That's when he saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, moving between the trees. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but something about its movement was off. "Hey," Mike called out, his voice echoing in the quiet night. "Who's there?" The figure paused for a moment, and Mike could have sworn he saw a faint orange glow emanating from where its eyes should be. Then, in a blink, it was gone, melting into the shadows of the forest. Mike stood frozen on his porch, trying to process what he'd just seen. Was it real, or a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? The smell of smoke was fading now, leaving him once again questioning his senses. As the adrenaline wore off, Mike became aware of the chill night air on his skin. He retreated back into the cabin, locking the door behind him. Sleep, he knew, would be impossible now. Mike settled into his small living room, pulling out his laptop. If the park officials wouldn't take this seriously, he'd have to do his own research. He began searching for any similar incidents, any reports of strange fires or smoke without apparent cause. Hours passed as Mike fell down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, folklore, and scientific papers. Most of it was useless, but a few threads seemed to connect to what he'd experienced. References to fire spirits in Native American legends, obscure reports of fires with unusual properties in national parks across the country. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mike sat back, rubbing his tired eyes. He had more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. Whatever was happening in Yosemite, it wasn't an isolated incident. A soft ping from his laptop drew his attention. A new email had arrived, from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line made his blood run cold. "Stop digging, Ranger Holbrook, for your own good." Mike stared at the screen, a mix of fear and determination settling in his gut. Someone, or something, knew what he was doing. And they wanted him to stop, but Mike knew he couldn't. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, he had to uncover the truth behind the unseen threat that was stalking Yosemite. As he closed his laptop and prepared for another day, Mike made a silent vow. He would solve this mystery no matter where it led him. Little did he know the path ahead would challenge everything he thought he knew about the world and his place in it. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Mike found himself in the ranger station's break room, nursing his third cup of coffee. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his gaze was sharp, focused on the door. Sarah walked in, her eyebrows rising at the sight of him. "Mike, you look like you've been here all night." He gestured for her to close the door. "Sarah, we need to talk. Something happened last night, and I don't know who else I can trust." Concern flashed across her face as she sat down across from him. "What's going on?" Mike leaned in, lowering his voice. "The smoke, it came back last night, and this time, I saw something in the woods. Something that shouldn't exist." He recounted the events of the night, including the mysterious email. Sarah listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each word. "Mike, I don't even know what to say. Have you told anyone else?" He shook his head. "No, just you. After yesterday's meeting, I don't think the higher-ups would believe me anyway." Sarah bit her lip, thinking. "Okay, here's what we'll do. I've got access to the park's historical records. Maybe there's something there that can shed some light on this. You keep digging into current events, see if there are any patterns we're missing." Mike nodded, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Sarah. I was beginning to think I was losing my mind." "Hey," she said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "We're in this together now. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out." As Sarah left to start her research, Mike headed out for his daily patrol. The park was bustling with tourists, oblivious to the strange occurrences of the past few days. He found himself studying each face, wondering if any of them might be connected to the email he'd received. Midway through his route, Mike's radio crackled to life. "Ranger Holbrook, come in." "Holbrook here, go ahead." "We've got a situation at Bridal Veil Fall. Some hikers are reporting unusual activity. Can you check it out?" Mike's pulse quickened. "On my way." When he arrived at the base of the falls, a small crowd had gathered. An elderly man, his weathered face creased with concern, approached Mike as soon as he parked. "Ranger, thank goodness you're here. You've got to see this. It ain't natural." Mike followed the man to the edge of the viewing area. At first, everything looked normal, the majestic falls tumbling down the cliff face as they had for millennia. But then he saw it. Near the base of the falls, the water seemed to be burning. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, pulling out his binoculars for a closer look. Sure enough, flames danced on the surface of the pool at the bottom of the falls, steam rising in unnatural patterns. As he watched, the flames seemed to move against the current, climbing partway up the waterfall before dissipating. Mike turned to the gathered crowd. "Folks, I need everyone to step back. This area is now closed for safety reasons." As he began ushering people away, he caught sight of a familiar face. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a geologist who'd been studying the park for years, was staring at the phenomenon with a mixture of fascination and fear. "Dr. Reeves," Mike called out. "A word, please?" She joined him, her eyes never leaving the burning water. "Ranger Holbrook, I've never seen anything like this. It defies all known laws of physics. Doctor, have you ever encountered anything similar in your research? Any references in geological records or local legends?" She hesitated, glancing around before leaning in close. "Not officially, no, but there are stories. Old stories that the Park Service doesn't like us to talk about." Mike's interest piqued. "What kind of stories?" "Legends of fire spirits, entities that could control flame and heat. Most dismiss them as native superstitions, but after seeing this..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Thank you, Doctor. I may need to speak with you again about this." As Dr. Reeves walked away, Mike's radio buzzed again. It was Sarah. "Mike, you need to get back here. I found something in the archives. Something big." 20 minutes later, Mike burst into the records room where Sarah was surrounded by stacks of old files and photographs. "What did you find?" he asked, slightly out of breath. Sarah held up a faded photograph. "Look at this. It's from 1947, but it shows the exact same phenomenon we're seeing now. Burning water, strange fire patterns, everything." Mike examined the photo, his mind racing. "Does it say what caused it?" Sarah's expression darkened. "That's where it gets weird. All the official reports from that time are heavily redacted, but I found this." She handed him a crumbling piece of paper. It was a handwritten note, the ink faded but still legible. "Project Prometheus must be contained. The fire cannot be controlled." Mike looked up, meeting Sarah's worried gaze. "Project Prometheus? What the hell have we stumbled into, Sarah?" Before she could respond, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, they saw a black SUV pull up, men in dark suits emerging. "Oh no," Sarah whispered. "Mike, I think we've attracted some unwanted attention." Mike's mind raced, trying to process everything he'd learned. The burning water, the old legends, Project Prometheus. It all pointed to a conspiracy far larger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. "We need to get out of here," he said, quickly gathering the most important documents. "Whatever's going on, I have a feeling those men aren't here to help us solve the mystery." As they slipped out the back door, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they were now in way over their heads. The unseen threat was becoming all too real, and he knew their lives would never be the same. They ran towards Mike's Jeep, the sound of authoritative voices growing behind them. As they sped away from the ranger station, Sarah clutched the files to her chest. "What now?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. Mike gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Now, we find out the truth, no matter what it takes." As they drove deeper into the park, away from the approaching agents, both Mike and Sarah knew they had crossed a line. They were no longer just park rangers investigating strange occurrences. They had become fugitives pursued by forces they didn't understand, in a race to uncover a truth that could change everything. The conspiracy was real, and they were now at its heart. The sun had barely risen over Yosemite's towering cliffs when a sleek black helicopter touched down in a clearing near the ranger station. As its rotors slowed, a tall figure emerged, his dark suit a stark contrast to the natural beauty surrounding him. Mike and Sarah, hidden in the tree line, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Who do you think that is?" Sarah whispered, her breath visible in the cool morning air. Mike shook his head, his eyes never leaving the newcomer. "I don't know, but whoever he is, he's not here for the scenery." The man strode purposefully towards the cluster of park officials who had gathered to meet him. Even from a distance, Mike could see the air of authority that surrounded him. "We need to get closer," Mike murmured. "Come on." Carefully, they crept through the underbrush, positioning themselves within earshot of the group. The stranger's deep, authoritative voice carried clearly through the still morning air. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Ash. I've been sent by the Department of Interior to investigate the recent anomalies in your park. Superintendent Jennings stepped forward, his posture defensive. With all due respect, Dr. Ash, we have the situation under control. There's no need for outside intervention. Dr. Ash's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. Under control? Is that why 2 of your rangers are currently AWOL with classified documents? Mike and Sarah exchanged alarmed glances. How did he know? Now, Dr. Ash continued, I'll need full access to all your facilities and records. My team will be arriving shortly to begin a thorough investigation. As the group moved towards the ranger station, Mike tugged on Sarah's sleeve. We need to move. If they start searching, they'll find us in no time. They retreated deeper into the forest, their minds racing with questions. Who was Dr. Ash? How much did he know about their discovery? Hours later, Mike and Sarah found themselves in a remote part of the park, far from the usual tourist trails. They had been careful to avoid the increased patrols, moving only when necessary and staying off the main paths. Mike, Sarah said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen between them. What are we going to do? We can't hide out here forever. Mike ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his ranger's instincts warring with his burning curiosity. I know, but we can't just turn ourselves in either. Not until we know what's really going on. A twig snapped nearby, causing both of them to freeze. Footsteps approached and a familiar voice called out, I know you're there, Rangers, let's talk. Dr. Ash stepped into view, alone and unarmed. His piercing gaze swept over Mike and Sarah, assessing them. How did you find us? Mike demanded, positioning himself protectively in front of Sarah. Dr. Ash's lips curled into a small smile. I've been tracking anomalous heat signatures. You two have been leaving quite a trail. Sarah gasped. The fires, they're following us? Clever girl, Dr. Ash nodded. You're beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Now why don't we discuss this like civilized people? I believe we share a common goal. Mike's eyes narrowed. And what goal is that? To understand and control the fire elementals that have awakened in Yosemite, of course. The blunt admission stunned Mike and Sarah into silence. Dr. Ash used their momentary shock to continue. You've seen things, haven't you? Things that defy explanation. Fires that burn without fuel. Smoke that appears without a source. Water that ignites. I'm here to tell you it's all real, and it's only the beginning. Mike found his voice. Fire elementals? You expect us to believe in some kind of fairy tale? Dr. Ash's expression hardened. Belief is irrelevant, Ranger Holbrook. The elementals exist, whether you accept it or not. And right now, you and Ms. Cooper are the only ones who can help me contain them. Sarah stepped forward. Why us? What makes us so special? Because, Dr. Ash said, his voice low and intense, you've been marked by the fire. It's chosen you. As if on cue, Mike felt a burning sensation on his arm. Rolling up his sleeve, he saw a faint flame-like pattern etched into his skin. Sarah gasped, revealing a similar mark on her own arm. Dr. Ash nodded grimly. It's already begun. Now, we don't have much time. I need you to trust me and come with me. I have equipment that can help us track and potentially communicate with the elementals. Mike and Sarah exchanged uncertain glances. Could they trust this stranger? But what choice did they have? All right, Mike said finally. We'll go with you, but we want answers. All of them. Of course, Dr. Ash agreed. Follow me. My base camp is not far from here. As they trekked through the forest, Dr. Ash explained the basics of what they were dealing with. Fire elementals, ancient spirits of flame and heat, had been dormant for centuries. Something had awakened them, and now they were growing stronger, more active. Project Prometheus, Sarah interjected. That's what this is about, isn't it? Dr. Ash's step faltered for a moment. You are well informed, Ms. Cooper. Yes, Project Prometheus was an attempt to harness the power of the elementals. It did not go as planned. They emerged into a small clearing where a high-tech camp had been set up. Computers hummed, satellite dishes pointed skyward, and strange devices Mike couldn't even begin to understand dotted the area. "Welcome to our command center," Dr. Ash announced. "From here, we'll track the elementals' movements and try to predict their next manifestation." As Dr. Ash began to show them around, explaining the various equipment, a loud alarm suddenly blared from one of the computers. "What's that?" Mike asked, tensing. Dr. Ash rushed to the screen, his face paling as he read the data. "It's happening. A massive elemental manifestation, heading straight for us." The air around them began to shimmer with heat. In the distance, they could see a wall of fire moving through the forest, consuming everything in its path. "What do we do?" Sarah cried, fear evident in her voice. Dr. Ash turned to them, his expression grim. "We stand our ground. This is what you've been chosen for. It's time to face the fire." As the inferno approached, Mike felt the mark on his arm burning intensely. He looked at Sarah, saw the determination in her eyes mirroring his own. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The fire elemental burst into the clearing, a towering figure of living flame. As it locked its gaze on them, Mike realized that their lives would never be the same. The real battle was just beginning. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air as Mike, Sarah, and Dr. Ash stood in the charred clearing, their clothes singed and faces smudged with soot. The encounter with the fire elemental had been intense, leaving them all shaken but alive. Mike broke the stunned silence first. What just happened?" Dr. Ash, his usual composure slightly cracked, ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "That Ranger's was a full manifestation of a fire elemental. And you," he paused, looking at Mike and Sarah with a mixture of awe and concern. "You both managed to repel it." Sarah glanced down at her hands, still feeling the residual warmth coursing through her veins. "How did we do that? It was like the fire listened to us." "That's precisely what happened," Dr. Ash nodded. "The marks you bear, they connect you to the elementals. With proper training, you could learn to control them." Mike's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Control them? Is that what this is all about? Weaponizing these things?" Dr. Ash's expression hardened. "It's about understanding and containing a force that could destroy everything if left unchecked. But we don't have time for a philosophical debate. We need to move. That manifestation will have attracted attention." As if on cue, the distant sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Dr. Ash quickly began packing up his equipment. "Grab what you can. We need to go. Now." Mike hesitated, then made a decision. He grabbed a nearby laptop and some files, stuffing them into a backpack. If they were going to get answers, they might need leverage. The trio fled into the dense forest, the sound of the approaching helicopter fading behind them. As they moved, Mike's mind raced with questions. He needed answers, and he wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. "Dr. Ash," he called out between breaths, "you owe us an explanation. What's really going on here?" Dr. Ash glanced back, his pace never slowing. "It's complicated, Ranger Holbrook. The full truth could fill volumes." "Then give us the Cliff Notes version," Sarah interjected, her tone leaving no room for argument. Dr. Ash sighed, guiding them towards a hidden trail. "Very well. The fire elementals have existed for millennia, mostly dormant, occasionally awakening to cause what humans perceived as natural disasters. Project Prometheus was an attempt to understand and harness their power." "For what purpose?" Mike pressed. "Initially, clean energy. Imagine the potential of an endless, self-sustaining fire source. But as often happens, there were those who saw other applications." Sarah's eyes widened with realization. Weapons, they wanted to use the elementals as weapons. Dr. Ash nodded grimly. "Precisely. But the elementals couldn't be controlled, not fully. The project was shut down, or so we thought." They emerged from the forest near a swift-flowing river. Dr. Ash led them to a concealed cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. Once inside, he continued his explanation. Recently, there have been signs of renewed elemental activity. Someone has restarted the project, and they're pushing the boundaries further than ever before. Mike set down the backpack, pulling out the laptop he'd grabbed. And that's where we come in? Because of these marks? Dr. Ash nodded, his expression serious. You and Sarah are the first humans in recorded history to successfully repel an elemental. You're the key to understanding them, and possibly to stopping whoever is behind this. Sarah, who had been examining the cave walls, suddenly called out, "Mike, look at this." On the rock face, barely visible in the dim light, were ancient petroglyphs. The crude drawings depicted human figures surrounded by flames, their arms outstretched in what looked like control or supplication. "It's us," Mike whispered, tracing the images with his fingers. "This has happened before." Dr. Ash approached, his eyes widening at the sight. "Extraordinary. This could change everything we thought we knew about human elemental interactions." As they studied the drawings, a faint beeping sound emanated from the backpack. Mike pulled out the laptop, opening it to find a flashing alert on the screen. "Dr. Ash," he called, "what is this? It looks like some kind of data feed." The doctor rushed over, his face paling as he read the screen. No, this can't be happening." "What is it?" Sarah demanded. "It's a feed from the park's seismic sensors. There's a massive spike in thermal activity throughout Yosemite. It's as if..." "As if what?" Mike pressed. Dr. Ash looked up, his eyes filled with dread. "As if the entire park is waking up. The elementals, they're all awakening simultaneously." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Mike and Sarah exchanged glances, realizing that their world had irrevocably changed. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ash straightened up, a look of determination replacing his fear. "We fight. We use what we've learned, what you two can do, to stop this before it's too late." Mike nodded, a surge of resolve flowing through him. "All right, but no more secrets, Dr. Ash. From now on, we're in this together. Full disclosure." "Agreed," Dr. Ash said, extending his hand. "Partners?" Mike and Sarah looked at each other, then back at Dr. Ash. They shook his hand in turn, sealing their alliance. As they began to plan their next move, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, a reminder of the awakening force that threatened not just Yosemite, but potentially the entire world. Mike looked at the ancient drawings on the wall one last time before turning to his new allies. "Let's do this. It's time to uncover the full truth and face whatever comes next." Little did they know, the path ahead would test not only their newfound abilities, but also their trust in each other and in themselves. The hidden truth was slowly unraveling, and with it, the fate of Yosemite, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. The pre-dawn air was crisp and heavy with tension as Mike, Sarah, and Dr. Ash emerged from their hidden cave. The park was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of the chaos to come. "We need to warn people," Mike said, his ranger instincts kicking in. "If what you're saying is true, Dr. Ash, the entire park is in danger." Dr. Ash shook his head, his expression grim. "A mass evacuation would cause panic and potentially trigger the elementals. We need to be strategic about this." Sarah, who had been scanning the horizon, suddenly pointed towards a distant ridge. "Look, is that smoke?" A thin column of dark smoke was rising from the trees, barely visible in the dim light. Dr. Ash pulled out a pair of high-tech binoculars from his pack, peering through them with growing concern. "It's not just smoke," he muttered. "The trees themselves are changing. It's as if they're turning into some kind of elemental hybrid." Mike's hand unconsciously went to the mark on his arm, feeling it pulse with warmth. "We can't just stand here. We have to do something." Dr. Ash lowered the binoculars, his face set with determination. "You're right. Mike, I need you to head to the ranger station. Use your authority to initiate a quiet evacuation of the most vulnerable areas. Sarah, you and I will investigate that smoke. Mike hesitated, looking at Sarah with concern. Are you sure we should split up? Sarah gave him a reassuring nod. We'll cover more ground this way. Besides, I've got some questions for our good doctor here. She fixed Dr. Ash with a pointed look. Be careful, Mike said, pulling Sarah into a quick hug before turning to Dr. Ash. Both of you. As Mike disappeared into the forest, Sarah and Dr. Ash began their trek towards the mysterious smoke. The silence between them was thick with unasked questions. Finally, Sarah broke it. All right, Dr. Ash, time for some answers. What aren't you telling us about Project Prometheus? Doctor, Ash sighed, his pace never slowing. It's not a simple story, Ms. Cooper. Project Prometheus didn't just study the elementals, it created them. Sarah stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with disbelief. Created them? How is that possible? Through a combination of advanced particle physics and what some might call alchemy, Dr. Ash explained, his voice low. The project found a way to imbue ordinary matter with elemental energy, but the process was unstable, unpredictable. The elementals they created were wild, uncontrollable. As they resumed walking, the smell of smoke grew stronger. Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what she'd just learned. So these elemental hybrids we're seeing now are likely the result of someone restarting the project, Dr. Ash finished. Someone who thinks they've solved the control problem. They crested a hill, and the source of the smoke came into view. A grove of ancient sequoias stood before them, their massive trunks glowing with an inner fire. The bark had taken on a metallic sheen, and flames danced among the branches without consuming them. My God, Sarah whispered, awestruck by the beautiful yet terrifying sight. Dr. Ash pulled out a device from his pack, scanning the trees. The elemental energy readings are off the charts. This is far more advanced than anything we achieved in the original project. Suddenly, a crackle of static came from Sarah's radio. Mike's voice, filled with urgency, broke through. Sarah! Come in, Sarah. She grabbed the radio, her heart racing. Mike, what's wrong? The ranger station. It's gone. Everyone's vanished. There's just ash and those metallic flakes everywhere. Sarah and Dr. Ash exchanged alarmed glances. Mike, listen to me. Dr. Ash spoke into the radio. Do not touch anything. The metallic residue could be dangerous. What's your exact location? I'm at the main station near the visitor center. There's something else. The air feels strange, like it's charged with electricity. Dr. Ash's face paled. Mike, get out of there now. It's not safe. But only static answered them. Sarah frantically tried to re-establish contact, but to no avail. We have to go help him, she said, already turning to head back. Dr. Ash grabbed her arm. Wait, look. The elemental trees were moving, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. A low, rumbling groan emanated from the grove, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Run! Dr. Ash yelled, pulling Sarah along as they fled from the awakening elemental forest. They sprinted through the woods, the sound of cracking timber and roaring flames following close behind. Sarah's lungs burned, but fear and adrenaline pushed her forward. Suddenly the ground gave way beneath them. They tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard in a small clearing. As Sarah struggled to her feet, she realized with horror that they were surrounded. Elemental hybrids of all kinds encircled them. Trees of living flame, rocks that glowed with intense heat, even small animals with fur that flickered like fire. And at the center of it all stood a figure that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was Mike, but not Mike. His eyes glowed with an inner fire, and his skin had taken on the same metallic sheen as the elemental trees. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of crackling flames. Welcome, Sarah. The thing that was once Mike said. We've been waiting for you. Dr. Ash stepped in front of Sarah protectively. Who are you? What have you done with Ranger Holbrook? The elemental Mike tilted his head, a cruel smile playing on his lips. I am the future, Dr. Ash. the culmination of your precious Project Prometheus. And as for Mike, let's just say he's seen the light. Or rather, the fire. Sarah felt her mark burning intensely, responding to the powerful elemental energy surrounding them. She realized with growing dread that they were caught in the middle of something far bigger and more dangerous than they could have imagined. As the elemental creatures closed in around them, Sarah knew that their fight for survival, and for the fate of Yosemite, had only just begun. The vanishing of the park staff was just the beginning, and she feared what other horrors this awakened elemental force had in store for them. The air shimmered with heat as Sarah and Dr. Ash stood surrounded by the elemental creatures, facing the transformed Mike. Sarah's mind raced, trying to reconcile the friend she knew with the fiery being before her. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I know you're in there. Fight this." The elemental Mike tilted his head, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Mike is gone, Sarah. We are Prometheus reborn, and we will cleanse this world with fire." Dr. Ash stepped forward, his scientific curiosity warring with his fear. Fascinating. The elemental energy has completely transformed his cellular structure. But how? The original project never achieved this level of integration. "Your limited vision held you back, Doctor," Elemental Mike responded, his voice a cacophony of crackling flames. "We have evolved beyond your primitive understanding." Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Sarah turned to see a massive plume of smoke rising from the direction of Yosemite Valley. "What have you done?" she demanded, horror dawning on her face. Elemental Mike's eyes flared brighter. "We have awakened our brethren. The great cleansing has begun." As if on cue, the elemental creatures surrounding them began to move, spreading out into the forest. Trees ignited, rocks melted, and the very air seemed to burn. Dr. Ash grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to get out of here now. We can't help Mike if we're dead." They turned to run, but a wall of flame erupted before them, blocking their path. The heat was intense, forcing them back. "There is no escape," Elemental Mike said, advancing on them. "Join us, Sarah. Embrace the fire within you." Sarah felt her mark burning, responding to the elemental energy surrounding them. For a moment, she felt a pull, a temptation to give in to the power. "No," she shouted, clutching her arm. "I won't become like you." Dr. Ash fumbled in his pack, pulling out a small device. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," he muttered, pressing a button. A high-pitched whine filled the air and the elemental creatures recoiled, including Mike. It was enough of a distraction for Sarah and Dr. Ash to break through a weak point in the firewall and run. They sprinted through the burning forest, dodging falling trees and leaping over streams of molten rock. The sounds of destruction echoed all around them. "What was that device?" Sarah gasped as they ran. "Elemental disruptor," Dr. Ash panted. "Prototype. Won't hold them off for long." They emerged from the tree line onto a ridge overlooking Yosemite Valley. The sight before them was apocalyptic. The iconic half-dome glowed red-hot, lava pouring from its face. El Capitan was engulfed in flames that seemed to defy gravity, climbing up its sheer face. The Merced River boiled and steamed, creating a thick fog that mixed with the smoke from countless fires. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her heart sinking. "How can we stop this?" Dr. Ash's face was grim. "I don't know if we can, but we have to try. There's an old research station nearby. If it's still intact, it might have the equipment we need to combat this." They made their way down the ridge, careful to avoid the increasingly unstable ground. The heat was oppressive, and Sarah could feel sweat pouring down her face, mingling with tears of desperation. As they approached the valley floor, they encountered a group of terrified tourists and park staff fleeing the inferno. "Help us!" a woman cried, clutching a young child to her chest. "What's happening?" Sarah's ranger instincts kicked in. "Head for the park exit," she instructed, pointing the way. "Stay together and avoid any flames or smoke. There should be emergency services setting up outside the park boundaries." As the group hurried away, Dr. Ash turned to Sarah. We can't save everyone. We need to focus on stopping this at its source. Sarah nodded reluctantly, her heart heavy. They pressed on, finally reaching the old research station. It was a nondescript building, partially hidden by the landscape. Remarkably, it seemed untouched by the chaos around it. Dr. Ash quickly typed a code into a hidden panel, and a door slid open. They rushed inside, sealing the entrance behind them. The interior was a stark contrast to the hell outside. Clean, sterile, and humming with advanced technology, it looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. What is this place? Sarah asked, looking around in awe. Dr. Ash moved quickly to a central console, his fingers flying over the controls. It's where Project Prometheus began, and hopefully where we can end it. Screens came to life, displaying data streams and video feeds from around the park. Sarah watched in horror as the elemental transformation spread, consuming more of Yosemite with each passing moment. How do we stop it? She asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. Dr. Ash's face was illuminated by the glow of the screens, his expression intense. The elementals are connected, part of a greater whole. If we can disrupt that connection at its source, we might be able to shut them all down. And the source is Mike, Dr. Ash said grimly. Or whatever he's become. He's the key to all of this. Sarah's heart sank. How can we fight him? You saw what he's capable of. Dr. Ash turned to her, his eyes serious. We fight fire with fire, Sarah. Your connection to the elemental energy, it's our only hope. We need to amplify it, give you the power to challenge Mike directly. But you said the original project couldn't control the elemental energy, Sarah protested. What makes you think I can? Because you're different, Dr. Ash explained. Your connection is natural, not forced like ours was. With the right equipment, we might be able to harness that connection safely. He gestured to a chamber in the corner of the room. It looked like a high-tech version of an isolation tank, covered in sensors and emitters. This was designed to contain elemental energy, Dr. Ash said, but we're going to use it to amplify yours instead. Sarah looked at the chamber, then back at the screens showing the destruction of Yosemite. She thought of Mike, trapped within the elemental force that had taken him over. She thought of all the people in danger. Taking a deep breath, she stepped towards the chamber. Let's do this. As Sarah prepared to enter the chamber, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. On the screens, they saw a massive wave of fire approaching, with Elemental Mike at its head. They've found us, Dr. Ash said, his voice tense. We're out of time. Sarah climbed into the chamber, her heart racing. As the door sealed shut, she heard Dr. Ash's voice over the intercom. Remember, Sarah, the fire is a part of you. Don't fight it. Control it. It's our only chance. The chamber hummed to life, and Sarah felt a surge of energy coursing through her body. Outside, the wall of fire drew closer, threatening to consume their last hope of stopping the inferno. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on the burning sensation of her mark. As the elemental energy built within her, she knew that the fate of Yosemite, and perhaps the world, rested on her ability to master the fire within. The chamber hummed with energy, as Sarah felt the elemental power coursing through her veins. Her skin tingled, and behind her closed eyelids, she saw flickering flames dancing in patterns she somehow understood. It was as if the fire itself was speaking to her, whispering secrets of its nature. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the facility. Sarah's eyes snapped open as Dr. Ash's panicked voice came through the intercom. Sarah, they're breaking through. I can't hold them off much longer. With a hiss, the chamber door opened. Sarah stepped out, her body glowing with an inner fire that didn't burn. She felt powerful, alive in a way she'd never experienced before. Dr. Ash, she called out, her voice resonating with a new authority. I'm ready. The scientist looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Remarkable, he breathed. The integration is complete. How do you feel? Before Sarah could answer, the facility's main door exploded inward in a burst of flame. Elemental Mike strode in, flanked by his fiery minions. "So," he said, his voice a cacophony of crackling flames, "the good doctor has been busy. You think you can stand against us, Sarah?" Sarah stepped forward, feeling the fire within her respond to the challenge. "I won't let you destroy everything, Mike. This ends now." Elemental Mike laughed, the sound like a raging inferno. "Brave words. But you're outnumbered and outmatched." With a gesture, he sent a wave of fire towards Sarah and Dr. Ash. Without thinking, Sarah raised her hands, and a wall of blue flame erupted before them, absorbing the attack. "Impossible," Elemental Mike hissed, his fiery eyes widening. Dr. Ash grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to get out of here. You're not ready to face him yet." Sarah nodded, maintaining the protective wall of flame. "What's the plan?" "There's an emergency exit," Dr. Ash said, pointing to a hidden panel. "It leads to an old mine shaft. We can use it to regroup." As Dr. Ash worked to open the secret passage, Sarah faced off against Elemental Mike and his minions. The air crackled with competing energies as flames of various colors danced and clashed. "You can't run forever, Sarah," Elemental Mike taunted. "Join us. Embrace the cleansing fire." Sarah felt a pull, a temptation to give in to the raw power surging through her, but she gritted her teeth, focusing on the faces of the people she'd sworn to protect. "Never," she growled, pushing back with a burst of energy that sent Elemental Mike staggering. "It's open," Dr. Ash called out. "Let's go." Sarah backed towards the hidden exit, maintaining her defensive flames. As she and Dr. Ash slipped into the narrow passage, she sent one final surge of fire to collapse the entrance behind them. They ran through the dark, winding tunnel, the sounds of Elemental Mike's fury fading behind them. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a moonlit forest clearing, far from the research facility. Sarah leaned against a tree, catching her breath. The glow of her skin had dimmed, but she could still feel the fire pulsing within her. "What now?" she asked, looking to Dr. Ash. The scientist was already setting up a portable command center, pulling equipment from a hidden cache. "Now," he said, his fingers flying over a keyboard, "we gather allies. We're not the only ones resisting the elemental takeover." A map of Yosemite appeared on a holographic display, showing pockets of blue amidst the spreading red of elemental control. "These are other survivors," Dr. Ash explained. "Park rangers, tourists, even some of my former colleagues who saw the danger coming. We need to unite them if we're going to have any chance of stopping this." Sarah nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "We'll need to train them, show them how to fight the elementals." "Agreed. And we'll need weapons." Dr. Ash pulled out a case revealing several devices similar to the one he'd used earlier. "Elemental disruptors. Not as powerful as your abilities, but they'll give our people a fighting chance." As they worked to contact the other resistance groups, Sarah's thoughts turned to Mike. Despite everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that her friend was still in there somewhere, trapped within the elemental force that had consumed him. "Dr. Ash," she said hesitantly, "is there any way we can save Mike? Bring him back from whatever he's become?" The scientist's face grew somber. "I don't know, Sarah. The level of elemental integration he's undergone, it's unprecedented. But if anyone has a chance of reaching him, it's you." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of a group of survivors, led by a familiar face, Linda Reeves, the head of Park Safety. "Sarah," Linda exclaimed, rushing to embrace her. "Thank God you're alive. We thought everyone at the ranger station was lost." Sarah quickly brought Linda and the others up to speed on the situation. As she demonstrated her new abilities, she saw a mix of fear and hope in their eyes. "I know this is a lot to take in," Sarah said, addressing the group. "But we're Yosemite's last line of defense. Are you with us?" There was a moment of hesitation, then Linda stepped forward. "We swore an oath to protect this park and its people. Whatever it takes, we're in." Over the next few hours, more survivors trickled in. Sarah and Dr. Ash worked tirelessly, organizing them into teams, distributing elemental disruptors, and beginning basic training in elemental combat. As dawn broke, Sarah stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, looking out over the smoke-filled valley below. The devastation was heartbreaking, but for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Dr. Ash joined her, his face etched with worry and lack of sleep. "They're as ready as they'll ever be," he said. "What's our next move?" Sarah's eyes hardened with determination. "We take the fight to them. It's time to show Mike and his elemental army that Yosemite won't fall without a fight." As if in response to her words, a distant roar echoed across the valley. The elementals were on the move, a tide of fire sweeping towards their position. Sarah turned to the assembled resistance, her body beginning to glow with inner fire. "This is it, everyone. Remember your training, watch each other's backs, and no matter what happens, don't give up hope." She raised her hand, summoning a brilliant blue flame that lit up the pre-dawn sky. "For Yosemite." The cry was taken up by the resistance fighters, a defiant shout against the encroaching inferno. As they prepared to meet the elemental onslaught, Sarah silently vowed to find a way to save Mike and end this nightmare once and for all. The battle for Yosemite was about to begin, and the fate of the park, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. The clash of elemental forces lit up the pre-dawn sky over Yosemite Valley. Sarah stood at the forefront of the resistance, her hands wreathed in blue flame as she deflected attack after fiery attack from the advancing elemental army. "Hold the line!" she shouted, her voice carrying over the roar of battle. "Don't let them break through." Beside her, Linda Reeves fired her elemental disruptor, causing a cluster of flame creatures to dissipate. "Sarah, we can't keep this up forever. We need a new plan." Dr. Ash's voice crackled over their comm units. "I'm working on it. If I can just isolate the frequency of the elemental network, we might be able to disrupt their coordination." Sarah gritted her teeth, pushing back a wave of fire with a burst of her own energy. The strain was beginning to show. Sweat poured down her face and her limbs trembled with exertion. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from the ranks of the elemental army. Elemental Mike, his body a swirling vortex of flame and smoke, locked eyes with Sarah. "Enough of this futile resistance," his voice boomed across the battlefield. "Sarah, I'm offering you one last chance. Join us, or watch everything you love burn to ash." For a moment, the fighting seemed to pause, all eyes turning to Sarah. She felt the weight of their expectations, their hopes, pressing down on her. "Never," she declared, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "We'll never stop fighting for Yosemite, Mike, and I'll never stop fighting for you." With a roar of fury, Elemental Mike launched himself at Sarah. The two collided in a spectacular explosion of competing energies, blue and orange flames intertwining in a deadly dance. As Sarah and Mike battled, the resistance fighters redoubled their efforts, emboldened by their leader's courage. But for every elemental they dispatched, two more seemed to take its place. Hours passed, and the toll of continuous combat began to wear on the defenders. Sarah's movement slowed, her reactions dulled by fatigue. In a moment of distraction, Elemental Mike landed a devastating blow, sending her crashing to the ground. "Sarah!" Linda cried out, rushing to her side. Elemental Mike loomed over them, his fiery form pulsing with malevolent energy. "It's over, Sarah. You've lost." Just as he raised his hand to deliver the final strike, a high-pitched whine filled the air. The elementals recoiled, their forms flickering and destabilizing. Dr. Ash's triumphant voice came over the comm. "I've done it! The disruptor field is active!" The tide of battle turned instantly. The resistance fighters pressed their advantage, pushing back the weakened elemental forces. Even Elemental Mike seemed affected, his flames dimming as he retreated. As the last of the elementals disappeared into the smoldering landscape, a cheer went up from the resistance. They had won the day, against all odds. Sarah struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on Linda for support. "Dr. Ash," she panted into her comm, "that was amazing timing. Where are you?" There was a moment of static. Then Dr. Ash's voice came through, sounding strained. I'm in the old bunker beneath El Capitan. Sarah, you need to get here quickly. There's something you need to see. Concern etched on her face. Sarah turned to Linda. Can you handle things here? Linda nodded. Go. We'll secure the area and tend to the wounded. Using the last reserves of her strength, Sarah made her way to the hidden bunker. As she descended into the underground facility, a sense of unease grew in the pit of her stomach. She found Dr. Ash in a circular room dominated by a massive computer array. The scientist was hunched over a console, his face illuminated by flickering screens. Dr. Ash? Sarah called out. What's going on? What did you need to show me? He turned to face her, and Sarah gasped. Dr. Ash's eyes glowed with an inner fire, and his skin had taken on a faint metallic sheen. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, his voice overlaid with a familiar crackling. I tried to fight it, but the call of the fire, it's too strong. Sarah took a step back, her hands instinctively flaring with defensive flame. You're one of them? How long? Dr. Ash, or the thing that had been Dr. Ash, smiled sadly. Since the beginning. I was the one who restarted Project Prometheus. I thought I could control it, use it to save the world from itself. But I underestimated the power of the elemental force. All this time, Sarah whispered, feeling betrayed and foolish. You've been manipulating us, haven't you? He nodded. I needed you, Sarah. Your natural connection to the elemental energy. It's the key to perfecting the transformation. With your power, we can remake the world in fire's image. Sarah's mind raced, reassessing everything she thought she knew. And Mike? Was his transformation part of your plan, too? A necessary step, Dr. Ash admitted. He was always meant to be the catalyst, to awaken your true potential. Anger flared within Sarah, her flames burning hotter. You used us. You've destroyed Yosemite, endangered countless lives, all for your insane experiment. Dr. Ash spread his arms wide, his form beginning to shimmer with heat. Don't you see, Sarah? This is evolution, the next step for humanity. Join us, and together we can usher in a new age of fire and rebirth. For a moment, Sarah felt the pull of the elemental energy, the temptation to give in to its raw power. But then she thought of the people she'd sworn to protect, of Mike trapped within his fiery prison, of Yosemite's natural beauty, turned to ash. No, she said, her voice firm and cold as steel. This ends now. With a gesture, she sealed the room's exits with walls of blue flame. Dr. Ash's expression shifted from persuasive to desperate. Sarah, please. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, she replied, her eyes blazing with determination. You're not the only one who's learned to control this power. She began to draw on the elemental energy around her, pulling it away from Dr. Ash and the computer systems. The scientist's form flickered, his connection to the elemental network weakening. Stop, he cried out. You'll destroy everything we've worked for. Sarah continued, sweat beading on her brow as she strained against the immense power. No, Dr. Ash, I'm saving everything you almost destroyed. With a final monumental effort, Sarah channeled all the gathered energy into the bunker's systems. Alarms blared as the computers overloaded, sparks flying from every console. Dr. Ash fell to his knees, the fiery glow fading from his eyes. What have you done? He gasped. I've shut it down, Sarah said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and the weight of her actions. All of it. The elemental network, Project Prometheus, everything. As if to confirm her words, a tremor shook the bunker. On the few screens still functioning, Sarah saw the elemental forces across Yosemite flickering and fading. She turned back to Dr. Ash, who looked suddenly old and very human. It's over. You've lost. As Sarah moved to restrain him, a realization struck her. If shutting down the network had affected all the elementals, then that meant... Mike, she whispered, hope and fear warring in her heart. Without another word to Dr. Ash, Sarah raced out of the bunker, praying that she hadn't just saved Yosemite at the cost of her friend's life. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As Sarah emerged into the smoke-filled air of Yosemite Valley, she knew that the hardest part of her journey still lay ahead. Sarah burst out of the bunker, her lungs burning as she gulped in the smoke-filled air of Yosemite Valley. The world around her was a scene of chaos and destruction, but her mind was focused on one thing: finding Mike. "Mike!" she called out, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and smoke. "Mike, where are you?" As she stumbled through the devastated landscape, she became aware of other voices calling out, confused and frightened. The elemental creatures were gone, leaving behind dazed and disoriented people, park visitors and staff who had been transformed. Linda Reeves appeared through the haze, her face streaked with soot. "Sarah, thank God you're all right. What happened down there?" Sarah quickly filled her in on Dr. Ash's betrayal and the shutdown of the elemental network. "We need to find Mike," she concluded. "He could be anywhere, and he might need help." Linda nodded, her expression grim. "I'll organize search parties. But Sarah, you need to know, things are bad out here. The park is in ruins, and we're getting reports of similar situations all across the country. Whatever you did, it had far-reaching effects." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders, but she pushed it aside for now. "One problem at a time. Let's find Mike." For hours they searched through the smoking ruins of Yosemite. The once majestic sequoias were charred husks, and the iconic rock formations bore scars from the elemental battle. It was heartbreaking, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the task at hand. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie red glow through the smoke-filled sky, a young ranger ran up to Sarah. "We found something," he panted. "Near the base of El Capitan, there's an opening that wasn't there before, and we hear voices coming from inside." Sarah's heart leaped. "Show me." They rushed to the location where a group of rescuers were gathered around a dark opening in the rock face. As they approached, Sarah could hear faint echoes coming from within. Without hesitation, she stepped towards the opening. Linda grabbed her arm. "Sarah, wait. We don't know what's down there. It could be dangerous." Sarah gently removed Linda's hand. "I have to go. It might be Mike. And if it's not, well, I'm probably the best equipped to handle whatever we find." She turned to the assembled group. "I need a small team to come with me. The rest of you keep searching and help the survivors. Linda, you're in charge up here." With a nod to her chosen companions, 2 experienced rangers and a geologist who had been part of the resistance, Sarah stepped into the darkness of the cave. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the mountain. The air grew cooler and the sounds of the outside world faded away. Their flashlights cast dancing shadows on the walls, which Sarah noticed were covered in strange, swirling patterns. "These markings," the geologist, Dr. Chen, murmured, running her hand along the wall. "They're not natural. It's as if the rock itself was changed by the elemental energy." As they pressed on, the passage suddenly opened up into a vast underground chamber. The group gasped in collective awe. The cavern was enormous, its ceiling lost in darkness above them. But what truly took their breath away was the light. Crystals of various sizes and colors were embedded in the walls, each emitting a soft, pulsing glow. The effect was mesmerizing, like being inside a giant living geode. "It's beautiful," one of the rangers whispered. Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to the center of the chamber. There, on a raised platform of crystalline rock, lay a motionless figure. "Mike," she cried, rushing forward. As she reached the platform, she saw that Mike was unconscious but breathing. His skin was pale, with faint shimmering patterns tracing across it, an echo of his elemental transformation. Sarah knelt beside him, gently shaking his shoulder. Mike, can you hear me?" Slowly, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment there was no recognition in them, and Sarah feared the worst. Then he blinked, and awareness returned to his gaze. "Sarah?" he croaked, his voice weak. What? What happened? Where are we? Tears of relief sprang to Sarah's eyes. You're back. Oh, Mike, you're really back. As she helped him sit up, the others gathered around, their faces a mix of relief and wariness. The last thing I remember, Mike said, rubbing his temples, is the smell of smoke in my cabin. Then, fire, so much fire, and a voice, telling me to. He trailed off, his eyes widening as fragments of memory returned. Oh God, Sarah, what did I do? Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly. It wasn't you, Mike. You were under the influence of the elemental energy. But it's over now. You're free. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. Fascinating. It seems this chamber acted as some kind of elemental focal point. When the network was shut down, the excess energy must have been drawn here, bringing you with it. Mike looked around, taking in the glowing crystals and the strange beauty of the cavern. I remember this place, Dean, or at least the other me does. It's old, ancient. The elementals, they've been here before, long ago. Sarah helped Mike to his feet, supporting him as he swayed slightly. Can you walk? We need to get you out of here, back to the surface. There's so much to tell you and so much work to be done. As they made their way back through the twisting passage, Sarah filled Mike in on everything that had happened. Dr. Ash's betrayal, the resistance, and the final shutdown of the elemental network. Mike listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of guilt and horror. All those people, all that destruction, and I was part of it. Sarah stopped, turning to face him. Listen to me, Mike, it wasn't your fault. You were as much a victim in this as anyone. What matters now is what we do next. They emerged from the cave into a world forever changed. The sun had set, and the night sky was visible for the first time in days, the stars peeking through gaps in the dissipating smoke. Linda rushed over, relief evident on her face. You found him. Mike, it's good to have you back. As the group made their way back to the makeshift command center, Sarah's mind was already racing with plans. The elemental threat might be over, but the work of rebuilding, both Yosemite and the lives affected by this catastrophe, was just beginning. Mike stumbled and Sarah tightened her grip on him. As she did, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest. The elemental energy was still there, diminished but not gone. She realized that this power, for better or worse, was now a part of her. Looking out over the scarred landscape of Yosemite, Sarah made a silent vow. She would use this power to heal, to rebuild, and to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. The underground chamber had shown her that the elementals were part of an ancient cycle. Now it was up to her and the other survivors to write the next chapter in that long, fiery history. As they walked towards an uncertain future, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Yosemite had endured, and so had they. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The first light of dawn crept over the scarred landscape of Yosemite Valley, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Sarah stood at the edge of the makeshift command center, her eyes scanning the horizon. The once lush forests were now skeletal remnants, and the iconic granite cliffs bore deep scars from the elemental battle. Mike joined her, his face etched with a mixture of guilt and determination. It's hard to believe this is the same place we swore to protect, he said softly. Sarah nodded, her voice heavy with emotion. But it's still Yosemite, and we're still here to protect it. As if on cue, Linda approached them, a tablet in hand. Sarah, Mike, we've got updates from across the park and beyond. It's not good, but there's hope. They gathered around the tablet as Linda swiped through images and reports. The elemental event had affected national parks and wilderness areas across the country, but Yosemite seemed to have borne the brunt of it. The good news, Linda continued, is that most of the transformed individuals have reverted back to normal just like Mike. The bad news is the scale of the destruction and the number of people still unaccounted for. Sarah squared her shoulders. Then we have our work cut out for us. Where do we start? Before Linda could answer, a commotion near the medical tent caught their attention. Dr. Chen emerged, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, Mike, you need to see this," she called out, waving them over. They rushed to the tent, where several cots were occupied by former elementals still recovering from their ordeal. Dr. Chen led them to a young woman sitting up in her cot, her arms outstretched. To everyone's amazement, tiny seedlings were sprouting from the woman's palms, growing at an accelerated rate. "I don't understand," the woman said, her voice trembling. "What's happening to me?" Sarah knelt beside her, gently taking her hands. "What's your name?" "Lily," the woman replied. "I was a botanist studying the park's flora when the fire came." Mike's eyes widened in realization. The elemental energy, it didn't just disappear when the network shut down. It changed. Dr. Chen nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Instead of destructive fire, it seems to have transformed into a regenerative force. Lily here isn't the only one. We're seeing similar phenomena in others, each aligned with their expertise or connection to nature." Sarah's mind raced with the implications. She turned to Lily, her voice gentle but urgent. "Lily, I know this is overwhelming, but your ability could be the key to healing Yosemite. Will you help us?" Lily looked at her hands, where the seedlings had already grown into small saplings. A spark of hope lit up her eyes. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I'll help." Over the next few hours, Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to identify and organize those with newfound regenerative abilities. They discovered park rangers who could sense and purify contaminated water sources, geologists who could stabilize damaged rock formations, and even a few individuals who seemed to be able to communicate with and soothe traumatized wildlife. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah stood before the assembled group of survivors and volunteers. The weight of leadership settled heavily on her shoulders, but she drew strength from the determined faces looking back at her. "I know we've all been through hell," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We've lost friends, homes, and the park we love. But look around you. We're still here. Yosemite is still here. And now, we have the power to heal it." She gestured to Lily and the others with regenerative abilities. "Some of us have been given extraordinary gifts, but every single one of us has a role to play in the rebirth of Yosemite. This won't be easy. It will take time, sweat, and tears. But together, we can restore this park to its former glory, and maybe make it even stronger than before." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mike stepped forward, standing beside Sarah. "We'll need to work in teams," he said. "Search and rescue, ecological restoration, infrastructure repair. Everyone will have a job to do." Linda joined them, adding, "And we'll need to coordinate with authorities outside the park. The world needs to know what happened here and what we're doing to fix it." As the crowd dispersed to their assigned tasks, Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest. The elemental energy within her pulsed, but it felt different now. Less like a raging fire and more like a nurturing hearth. She placed her hand on a nearby tree stump, charred and lifeless. Closing her eyes, she focused on the energy within her, willing it to heal rather than harm. To her amazement, she felt a stirring beneath her palm. When she opened her eyes, a tiny green shoot had emerged from the blackened wood. Mike watched in awe. "Looks like you've got some new tricks up your sleeve too," he said with a smile. Sarah nodded, a mix of wonder and determination on her face. "We all do, and we're going to need every bit of it." As the day progressed, the valley slowly came alive with activity. Lily and her team moved through the burned forests, coaxing new growth from the ashes. Others worked to clear debris, set up relief stations, and begin the monumental task of rebuilding. By sunset, the changes were already visible. Patches of green dotted the charred landscape, and the air smelled fresher, cleaner. It was a small start, but a powerful symbol of hope. As Sarah looked out over the valley, exhausted but fulfilled, Mike joined her once again. You know, he said quietly, when I was under the influence of the elemental energy, I thought I was working towards a rebirth too, a cleansing by fire. But this, he gestured to the signs of new life emerging around them. This is what real rebirth looks like. Sarah nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind his words. We've been given a second chance, Mike. Not just to rebuild, but to reimagine what Yosemite can be. A place where humanity and nature aren't at odds, but in true harmony. As the first stars appeared in the clearing sky, Sarah and Mike rejoined their team, ready to face whatever challenges the night might bring. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since the elemental crisis began, the future looked bright. Yosemite, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, was being reborn. And with it, a new generation of guardians was emerging, ready to protect and nurture the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world. The rhythmic beep of a heart monitor slowly penetrated Mike's consciousness. His eyelids felt heavy, refusing to open at first. When they finally did, the stark white ceiling of a hospital room swam into focus. "He's awake," a familiar voice called out. "Nurse! Doctor!" Mike turned his head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. Sarah's face came into view, her eyes red-rimmed but shining with relief. Sarah?" Mike croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. "You're alive?" She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Thanks to you, Mike. Thanks to you." Before Mike could respond, a doctor and nurse bustled into the room. The next few minutes were a blur of vital checks and rapid-fire questions. "Mr. Henderson," the doctor said, consulting his chart. "You've been in a coma for 3 weeks. Do you remember what happened?" Mike's brow furrowed as fragmented memories flashed through his mind. Fire, screams, a vortex of flame and wind. "The fire," he muttered. "The elementals. Did we stop them?" The doctor and nurse exchanged a puzzled glance. "Mr. Henderson," the doctor said gently, "there were some severe wildfires in Yosemite, but they've been contained. You were found unconscious near one of the fire sites. You're lucky to be alive." As the medical staff continued their examination, Mike's eyes met Sarah's. He saw the same questions reflected there, the same uncertainty about what was real and what wasn't. After the doctor and nurse left, promising to return with more information, Mike turned to Sarah. "Tell me everything," he said. Sarah pulled her chair closer to the bed. "It's complicated," she began. "The night of the ritual, at least I think it was that night, the fires just died out. All of them, all at once. It was like someone flipped a switch." "The ritual worked?" Mike asked, hope rising in his chest. Sarah shrugged. "Maybe. But Mike, here's the thing. No one seems to remember the elementals. The official story is that it was just a severe wildfire season. Dry conditions, climate change, that sort of thing." Mike's heart sank. "But Dr. Ash? The others?" "Dr. Ash is missing, presumed dead in the fires. As for the others..." Sarah's voice cracked. "We lost a lot of good people, Mike. The official death toll from the fires is in the dozens." Mike closed his eyes, grief washing over him. When he opened them again, he noticed Sarah fidgeting with her sleeve. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked. Sarah bit her lip, then slowly rolled up her sleeve. On her forearm was a strange, flame-shaped burn mark. "I'm not the only one," she said quietly. "Check your arm." With a growing sense of unease, Mike lifted his right arm. There, in the same spot as Sarah's, was an identical burn mark. As he stared at it, he could have sworn he saw it shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. "What does it mean?" he whispered. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But Mike, there's more. I was missing for weeks. They found me wandering in a remote part of the park, with no memory of where I'd been or what had happened. Mike's head was spinning. But you remember now? The elementals? The ritual? Sarah nodded. It all came back to me a few days ago. It's like there are two sets of memories in my head. One where we fought the elementals and one where I was just lost in the woods for a while. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A man in a dark suit entered, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Reeves," he said, nodding to each of them. "I'm Agent Wilson with the Department of Homeland Security. I'm here to debrief you on the events in Yosemite." Mike and Sarah exchanged wary glances. "What do you want to know?" Mike asked cautiously. Agent Wilson pulled up a chair. "Why don't you tell me about Project Prometheus?" The room fell silent. Mike's heart raced as he considered his options. Finally, he said, "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Agent Wilson. We were just doing our jobs, fighting a wildfire." The agent's expression didn't change. "Mr. Henderson, we both know that's not the whole story. The government is very interested in what transpired in Yosemite, particularly regarding certain anomalies." "Anomalies?" Sarah echoed, her voice carefully neutral. Agent Wilson leaned forward. "Let's cut to the chase. We know about the elementals. We know about Dr. Ash's involvement. What we don't know is how you two seem to be the only ones who remember any of it." Mike's mind raced. If the government knew, why the cover-up? Why were he and Sarah the only ones who remembered? His eyes flicked to the burn mark on his arm, and a chill ran down his spine. "Agent Wilson," Mike said slowly, "I think we're all in uncharted territory here. Why don't you tell us what you know and we'll fill in the gaps as best we can?" The agent considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Here's what we know. 3 weeks ago, multiple wildfires in Yosemite National Park suddenly and inexplicably extinguished themselves. In the aftermath, we found traces of an unknown substance, a kind of metallic ash, at multiple sites. We also found evidence of extreme temperature fluctuations that can't be explained by normal fire behavior." He paused, letting the information sink in. "Moreover, we've been monitoring a series of unusual fire incidents across the country since then. Small fires that behave in unexpected ways. And at each site, we find traces of that same metallic ash." Sarah leaned forward. "And Project Prometheus? What do you know about that?" Agent Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Only that it existed. Most records have been destroyed or redacted. We were hoping you could shed some light on that." Mike and Sarah shared a long look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Mike turned back to the agent. "We'll tell you what we know," he said. "But first, I want guarantees. Protection for us and for anyone else who was involved. And full disclosure from your end." Agent Wilson stood up. "I'll need to make some calls. But Mr. Henderson, Ms. Reeves, I think this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership." As the agent left the room, Mike slumped back against his pillows, exhaustion washing over him. Sarah took his hand, her touch anchoring him. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Mike looked at the burn mark on his arm, watching as it seemed to pulse with an inner light. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I have a feeling our fight isn't over. It's just changed." Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. As Mike watched, he could have sworn he saw a flicker of flame dance across the clouds, there and gone in an instant. A new chapter was beginning, and the world would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the Yosemite incident, and Mike Henderson found himself staring out the window of his new apartment in Sacramento. The city skyline was a far cry from the towering sequoias he once called home, but the Park Service had insisted on his transfer. For his own good, they'd said. Mike knew better. They wanted to keep him close, under observation. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and for a split second he saw a humanoid shape made of flame dancing across a distant rooftop. Mike blinked, and it was gone. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not again," he muttered. The sound of keys in the door made him turn. Sarah walked in, grocery bags in hand, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Hey, you're up," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "How are you feeling today?" Mike forced a smile. "Better. The nightmares weren't as bad last night." Sarah's expression softened. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. "That's good. Dr. Myers says the PTSD should improve with time and therapy." Mike nodded but didn't respond. How could he explain that his nightmares felt more like memories? That sometimes he wasn't sure if he was awake or dreaming? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah pulled back and looked him in the eye. "Did you see them again today?" Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment. On the rooftops." Sarah's hand unconsciously went to her forearm, where her own flame-shaped scar lay hidden beneath her sleeve. "I saw one too this morning, in the rearview mirror of my car." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Have you given any more thought to Agent Wilson's offer?" Mike tensed. The DHS agent had been persistent, calling weekly with promises of resources, protection, and answers. But Mike wasn't sure he trusted the government, not after everything that had happened. "I don't know, Sarah. Something doesn't feel right about it." Sarah sighed. "I know, but we can't keep going on like this. The visions are getting more frequent and—" She was cut off by the shrill ring of Mike's phone. He glanced at the screen and groaned. "Speak of the devil." "Agent Wilson?" Sarah asked. Mike nodded before answering the call. "Henderson," he said curtly. "Mr. Henderson?" Wilson's smooth voice came through the speaker. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "What do you want, Wilson?" "Straight to the point, as always. I'm calling because there's been an incident. A fire at a chemical plant in Fresno. It's exhibiting some unusual properties." Mike's heart rate quickened. "What kind of properties?" "The kind that defy the laws of physics," Wilson replied. "We need you and Ms. Reeves on site. A car will be there to pick you up in 30 minutes. Before Mike could protest, the line went dead. He looked at Sarah, who had heard enough to guess the situation. "Fresno?" she asked. Mike nodded. "Looks like we don't have a choice anymore," he said grimly. The drive to Fresno was tense and silent. As they approached the city, Mike could see a plume of smoke rising in the distance. But this wasn't ordinary smoke. It shimmered with an otherworldly light, twisting into impossible shapes. At the perimeter, they were met by Agent Wilson, looking as impeccable as ever in his dark suit, despite the chaos around them. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Reeves," he greeted them. "Thank you for coming. Follow me." As they walked towards the burning facility, Mike felt a strange sensation in his arm. He looked down to see his scar glowing faintly beneath his sleeve. A quick glance at Sarah confirmed she was experiencing the same thing. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Wilson?" Mike asked. The agent's face was grim. "We're not entirely sure. The fire started in a storage area about 2 hours ago. At first it seemed like a standard chemical fire, but then—" He trailed off as they rounded a corner, and Mike's jaw dropped. The fire before them was like nothing he'd ever seen, and he'd seen a lot. Flames in impossible colors danced and twisted, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. "My God," Sarah whispered beside him. As they watched, a tendril of flame reached out, grabbing a piece of metal debris. Instead of melting it, the fire seemed to absorb it, growing larger and brighter. "It's feeding," Mike realized aloud, "getting stronger." Wilson nodded. "We've thrown everything we have at it. Water, foam, chemical retardants. Nothing works. In fact, it seems to thrive on our efforts to extinguish it." Mike stepped closer, ignoring Wilson's warning shout. As he approached the fire, the glow in his arm intensified. The flame seemed to react to his presence, reaching out towards him like a curious animal. "Mike!" Sarah called out, fear evident in her voice. But Mike wasn't afraid. For the first time in months, he felt alive, connected. He reached out his hand, and the fire responded, swirling around his fingers without burning him. "It remembers," he said softly. "Part of it remembers us, what we did in Yosemite." He turned back to Sarah and Wilson, his eyes shining with an inner fire. "I can stop this," he said, "but I need you to trust me." Sarah stepped forward without hesitation. "What do you need me to do?" Wilson looked between them, confusion and awe warring on his face. Finally, he nodded. "Whatever you need, you've got it." Mike took a deep breath. "Okay. Sarah, I need you on my left. Wilson, keep everyone else back. This could get intense." As Sarah took her position beside him, Mike felt the power building within him. He raised his hands and the fire responded, swirling around them in a dizzying dance. "Ready?" he asked Sarah. She nodded, her own hands beginning to glow. Together they reached out to the inferno before them. Mike could feel the elemental forces at work, not just fire, but earth, air, and water too. They were out of balance, chaotic. With Sarah's help, he began to weave them back together, imposing order on the chaos. The process was grueling. Sweat poured down Mike's face, and he could feel Sarah trembling beside him. But slowly, surely, the fire began to change. The wild colors faded, the impossible shapes dissolved. With a final push, the flames collapsed in on themselves, leaving behind nothing but smoldering embers. Mike stumbled, suddenly exhausted. Sarah caught him, her own legs shaky. "We did it," she breathed. Wilson approached cautiously, his eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. What are you?" Mike looked at Sarah, then back at Wilson. "We're not entirely sure," he admitted, "but I think it's time we found out." As emergency crews moved in to secure the scene, Mike gazed at the burn mark on his arm. It no longer frightened him. Instead, he felt a sense of purpose, of potential. "This is our new normal," he said to Sarah. "We can't run from it anymore." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "So what's our next move?" Mike turned to Wilson. "You said there have been other incidents?" The agent nodded. "All across the country." "Then that's where we start," Mike said firmly. "These aren't just fires. They're elementals. And for better or worse, Sarah and I are the only ones who can communicate with them." As they walked away from the scene, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The world was changing, and he and Sarah were at the center of it all. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The new normal, indeed. Mike jolted awake, his heart racing. The familiar scent of smoke filled his nostrils, but this time, it wasn't just a nightmare. His eyes darted to his arm where the flame-shaped scar glowed an angry red. "Sarah," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, wake up." Sarah stirred beside him, her own scar pulsing in sync with his. "What's wrong?" she mumbled, then sat bolt upright as awareness hit her. "Another one?" Mike nodded grimly. "Yeah, and it feels big." As if on cue, Mike's phone buzzed. Agent Wilson's name flashed on the screen. "Henderson," Mike answered, putting the call on speaker. "We've got a situation," Wilson's voice crackled through. "A fire's broken out at a refinery in Texas. It's not natural." Sarah and Mike exchanged knowing looks. "We're on our way," Mike replied, already moving to pack. Within an hour, they were on a government jet bound for Texas. As they flew, Wilson briefed them on the situation. "The fire started about 3 hours ago," he explained. "At first, it seemed like a standard industrial accident, but then—" "Let me guess," Mike interrupted. "It started behaving oddly, moving against the wind, changing colors?" Wilson nodded. "Exactly. And that's not all. We're getting reports of similar incidents across the country. Small at first, but growing rapidly." Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "It's like they're waking up," she mused. "Or being woken up," Mike added darkly. As they approached the refinery, the extent of the situation became clear. The fire was massive, towering flames reaching into the night sky. But these weren't ordinary flames. They twisted and writhed, forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate. "My God," Sarah breathed as they stepped off the plane. "It's like it's trying to communicate." Mike nodded, feeling the pull of the fire in his very bones. His scar burned, more intensely than ever before. "I think it is communicating," he said, "to us." They approached the fire line, ignoring the shouts of protest from the firefighters. As they got closer, the flames seemed to reach out towards them, curious and hungry. "Mike," Sarah said, her voice tight with a mix of fear and excitement, "I think I can hear it." Mike closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation in his arm, and there it was, not words exactly, but feelings, impressions, anger, confusion, a desperate need to grow, to consume. "It's lost," he said softly. "It doesn't know why it's here or what it's supposed to do." Sarah nodded. "So it's just reacting, like a scared animal." Mike took a deep breath. "We need to calm it down, show it that it's safe." Together, they stepped forward, hands outstretched. The fire surged towards them, but instead of burning, it enveloped them in a cocoon of warmth. In that moment, Mike felt a connection snap into place. He could sense the elemental's confusion, its fear. Gently, he pushed back with feelings of calm, of safety. "It's okay," he murmured, not sure if he was speaking aloud or in his mind. "You're safe. You don't need to fight anymore." Beside him, he could feel Sarah doing the same. Slowly, ever so slowly, the fire began to calm. The wild, erratic movements became more controlled, the angry reds and oranges softening to gentle blues and purples. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The fire collapsed in on itself, leaving behind nothing but a faint warmth and the acrid smell of smoke. Mike stumbled, suddenly exhausted. Sarah caught him, her own legs shaky. "We did it," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. Agent Wilson approached, his usually impassive face showing clear awe. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "How did you do it?" Mike shook his head. "I'm not sure we did anything. We just showed it another way." As they walked back towards the command center, Mike's phone buzzed again. It was a news alert, reports of fires spontaneously extinguishing themselves across the country. "It's happening everywhere," he said, showing Sarah and Wilson the screen. "Whatever we did here, it affected all of them." Wilson's face grew serious. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to—" He was cut off by a sudden searing pain in Mike's arm. Mike cried out, clutching his scar. Beside him, Sarah did the same. "What's happening?" Wilson demanded, reaching for his weapon. Mike shook his head, gritting his teeth against the pain. "I don't know. It's like, ah!" A pulse of energy exploded from both Mike and Sarah, knocking Wilson off his feet. When he looked up, his jaw dropped. Mike and Sarah stood transformed. Their skin shimmered with an inner fire, their eyes glowing like embers. Flames danced around their fingers but didn't seem to harm them. "Mike?" Sarah's voice was tinged with fear and awe. "What's happening to us?" Before Mike could answer, a vision slammed into him. He saw fires erupting across the globe, elementals rising from the flames. And at the center of it all, a massive humanoid figure made entirely of fire, its eyes fixed on Los Angeles. The vision faded, leaving Mike gasping. "We need to get to LA, he said urgently. "Now." "Why? What did you see?" Sarah asked, the flames around her fingers intensifying with her anxiety. Mike met her gaze, his glowing eyes serious. "The source, the one waking all the others. It's heading for Los Angeles, and if we don't stop it—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the stakes. Wilson was already on his phone, barking orders. "I want a jet fueled and ready in 10 minutes, and get me everything we have on elemental activity in the Los Angeles area." As they rushed towards the waiting vehicle, Mike caught Sarah's hand. Despite the flames dancing across their skin, her touch was comforting, grounding. "Sarah," he said softly. "I don't know what's happening to us, but—" She squeezed his hand, cutting him off. "We're in this together, Mike. Whatever comes next, we face it as one." Mike nodded, feeling a surge of determination. They had been called to this, chosen for reasons they didn't yet understand. But one thing was clear: the fate of the world now rested in their hands. As they climbed into the vehicle, Mike cast one last look at the refinery. In the distance, he could have sworn he saw a figure made of flame watching them. It raised a fiery hand in what might have been a salute, then vanished. The battle for Los Angeles awaited, and with it, the true test of their newfound powers. The calling had come. Now it was time to answer. The government jet touched down at LAX, just as the first rays of dawn were breaking over the city. Mike and Sarah, still shimmering with an otherworldly glow, stepped onto the tarmac. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance, sirens wailed. "It's already started," Mike said grimly, his eyes scanning the horizon where several plumes of smoke rose into the sky. Agent Wilson jogged up to them, his suit disheveled and his face haggard from the overnight flight. "We've got reports of fires breaking out all over the city," he said, handing them each an earpiece. "These will keep us in contact. We've got teams deployed, but they're not equipped to handle whatever these things are." Sarah nodded, fitting the earpiece in place. "Where do we start?" Before Wilson could answer, a massive explosion rocked the city. They turned to see a fireball rising from the direction of downtown. "I guess that answers that question," Mike said. He turned to Sarah, his eyes glowing with determination. "Ready?" She took his hand, flames dancing between their intertwined fingers. "Always." They took off running, their bodies moving with supernatural speed and agility. As they approached downtown, the scale of the disaster became apparent. Cars were overturned and burning, buildings were engulfed in flames that moved with unnatural purpose, and people were fleeing in terror. "There." Sarah pointed to a towering inferno that had once been a skyscraper. At its heart, they could see a massive humanoid figure made entirely of fire. Mike's earpiece crackled to life. "Henderson, Reeves, what's your status?" Wilson's voice came through. "We've got eyes on what looks like the primary elemental," Mike responded. "It's big, Wilson. Really big." "Can you contain it?" Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We're about to find out." They approached the building, the heat intensifying with each step. Smaller fire elementals danced around them, curious but keeping their distance. "Hey!" Mike shouted at the massive figure. "We need to talk." The fire elemental turned, its flickering face regarding them with what might have been surprise. It let out a roar that shook the ground, sending a wave of flame towards them. Sarah stepped forward, raising her hands. The wave of fire split around them, leaving them untouched. "We're not here to fight you," she called out. "We want to understand." The elemental paused, tilting its head in a disturbingly human gesture. Then it spoke, its voice a crackling, hissing sound that somehow formed words. "Understand? You are the ones who do not understand. We were imprisoned, forgotten. Now we are free, and we will burn this world to ash." Mike felt a chill despite the intense heat. "Who imprisoned you? Why?" The elemental's form swelled with rage. "The ancient ones. They feared our power, so they bound us to this realm. But now the seals are breaking and we will have our revenge." It lashed out again, this time with more focus. Mike and Sarah were forced to dive apart as a lance of white-hot flame struck where they had been standing. "Mike!" Sarah called out. "We need to contain it before it destroys the whole city." Mike nodded, his mind racing. He reached out with his newfound senses, feeling the ebb and flow of the elemental energies around them. "Sarah, remember the ritual in Yosemite? I think we can adapt it." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. They began to move in sync, their movements forming an intricate dance around the raging elemental. As they moved, they began to chant, words in an ancient language that they somehow knew instinctively. The air around them began to shimmer, a barrier of energy forming between the elemental and the rest of the city. The massive fire being roared in fury, hurling itself against the barrier, but it held. "It's working," Sarah shouted, her voice strained with effort. But their victory was short-lived. A new voice cut through the chaos, cold and calculating. "Well done, Mr. Henderson, Ms. Reeves. You've exceeded our wildest expectations." They turned to see a man in a crisp military uniform stepping through the flames completely unharmed. Behind him were several soldiers, each carrying what looked like high-tech energy weapons. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, not lowering his guard. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "General Hawthorne, Special Projects Division, we've been watching you two very closely." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You knew about this? About the elementals?" "Oh, we've known for quite some time," Hawthorne replied. "Project Prometheus was just the beginning. We've been working to harness elemental energy for years, and now, thanks to you, we have living weapons at our disposal." The realization hit Mike like a punch to the gut. "You broke the seals. You set them free on purpose." Hawthorne's smile widened. "Very perceptive, Mr. Henderson. Yes, we needed a catalyst to fully awaken their powers, and you two have performed admirably in that role." "You're insane," Sarah spat. "You can't control these beings. They'll destroy everything." "That's where you come in," Hawthorne said. He gestured to his soldiers, who raised their weapons. "You've demonstrated a unique ability to communicate with and control the elementals. You'll be coming with us to help refine our methods." Mike felt rage building inside him, his own inner fire responding to his emotions. "And if we refuse?" Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Then you'll be deemed a threat to national security and dealt with accordingly." The standoff was interrupted by a deafening roar. The contained elemental had been listening, and it was not pleased. With a surge of power, it shattered the barrier Mike and Sarah had created. "You dare to think you can control us?" it bellowed, its form growing even larger. "We will show you the true meaning of power." Chaos erupted. The elemental lashed out in all directions, its fury no longer focused solely on Mike and Sarah. Hawthorne's soldiers opened fire, their energy weapons seeming to only enrage the being further. "Sarah!" Mike shouted over the din. "We need to end this now." She nodded, understanding his intent without words. They joined hands, channeling their combined power. The flame-shaped scars on their arms glowed brighter than ever, and they felt a connection not just to each other, but to the very essence of fire itself. "Enough!" they shouted in unison, their voices carrying a power that made even the raging elemental pause. A pulse of energy radiated out from them, washing over the elemental, Hawthorne and his men, and spreading throughout the city. Where it passed, fires extinguished, and the smaller elementals seemed to calm, the massive fire being regarded them with what might have been respect. "You carry the old power," it rumbled. Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment." Mike stepped forward, his hand still clasped with Sarah's. "We can find a way to coexist," he said. "But not like this. Not through destruction."
The elemental considered for a long moment, then nodded. Its form began to shrink, condensing down until it was only slightly larger than a human. "We will listen," it said, "but beware the ones who seek to cage us." Its gaze flickered to Hawthorne, who was picking himself up off the ground. "This isn't over," Hawthorne snarled, but his bravado was undercut by the fear in his eyes. "You're right," Mike replied coldly. "It's just beginning, and you better hope you're on the right side when the dust settles." As the approached and the sun was fully over Los Angeles, Mike and Sarah stood amid the wreckage, hand in hand. The element had one disaster, but they all knew that this was the opening in a war that would reshape the world. The urban inferno had been quenched, but the real fire was just starting. The line was a tapestry of smoke and flame, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded over the past 2 hours. Mike stood atop a partially collapsed skyscraper, his eyes glowing with an inner fire as he surveyed the devastation below. Sarah approached, her own form shimmering with barely contained elemental energy. "The evacuation is almost complete," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But we've got bigger problems." "Grim, Hawthorne?" Sarah nodded.
"His team is moving in from all sides. They're using some kind of tech to suppress the smaller elementals. It's not pretty, Mike." Before Mike could respond, their elemental ally, a being of living flame they'd come to call Ember, materialized beside them. The humans approach with weapons of cold iron and bitter water, Ember hissed, its form flickering with agitation. They seek to bind us once more, to use us as their puppets of destruction. Mike clenched his fists, feeling the power surge within him. We won't let that happen, he said firmly. But we can't fight them and protect the city at the same time. Sarah's eyes widened as realization dawned. Mike, you're not thinking of... He met her gaze, his decision already made. It's the only way, Sarah. I have to fully embrace this power, become one with the flame. It's the only chance we have of ending this without more bloodshed. But you could lose yourself, Sarah protested, grabbing his arm. We don't know what full immersion in the elemental plane will do to a human consciousness. Mike smiled sadly, cupping her face with his free hand. That's why I need you to be my anchor. Keep me tethered to this world, to what matters. Ember observed their exchange with curious eyes. The binding you speak of, it is not unlike the rituals of old, but the risk is great, flame-touched one. I know, Mike said, his resolve strengthening. But it's a risk we have to take. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the air, reminding them of the urgency of their situation. We're out of time, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. What do you need me to do? Mike took both of her hands in his. Just hold on to me, and don't let go. No matter what happens, no matter what you see or feel, don't let go. Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I won't. I promise. Mike turned to Ember. And you? Will you help us? The elemental seemed to consider for a moment, before nodding. Your cause is just flame-touched one. We will lend our strength to yours. With that, Ember's form began to expand, enveloping Mike and Sarah in a cocoon of living fire. Mike closed his eyes, feeling the barrier between himself and the elemental plane grow thin. Remember who you are, Mike Henderson? Sarah's voice came through the roar of the flames. Remember why we fight. Mike took a deep breath and let go. The world exploded into light and heat. Mike felt his consciousness expand, merging with the very essence of fire itself. He was everywhere and nowhere, a being of pure energy and will. Through the inferno of his transformed senses, he could feel the elementals across the city, across the world. He could sense their fear, their anger, their confusion. And he could feel the cold, unyielding presence of Hawthorne's forces closing in. With a thought, Mike reached out to the elementals, his voice resonating through the fabric of reality itself. Brothers, sisters, hear me, he called out. We need not be enemies of this world. We can find balance, coexistence. But first we must stand together against those who would enslave us all. He felt the response, a surge of agreement and unity from elementals far and wide. As one, they rose up against Hawthorne's suppression technology, their combined power overwhelming the human defenses. Through it all, Mike could feel Sarah's presence, a lifeline tethering him to his humanity. Her love, her determination, her unwavering support, they were beacons in the chaos of his transformed consciousness. With his newfound power, Mike turned his attention to Hawthorne's command center. He could see the general barking orders, his face a mask of frustration and fear. Mike manifested before him, his form a swirling vortex of flame and light. It's over, Hawthorne, he said, his voice echoing with otherworldly power. Call off your forces. Hawthorne stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. What are you? I am what you sought to control, Mike replied. The power you thought you could harness. But we are not weapons, Hawthorne. We are not tools for your ambition. With a gesture, Mike disabled the remaining suppression devices. Around the city, around the world, elementals broke free from their constraints. The old barriers are gone, Mike continued. The elementals are awakening, but not as conquerors. We can help this world, heal the damage done by centuries of neglect, but only if we work together. Hawthorne's face contorted with rage. You fool! Do you think the world will just accept these things living among us? There will be panic, chaos. Mike's form pulsed with barely contained energy. Then it's up to us to show them a better way. Starting now. With that, Mike expanded his consciousness once more, reaching out to every television, every radio, every electronic device capable of carrying his message. People of Earth, he began, his voice resonating across the globe. I know you're afraid. I know the events of the past days have shaken your understanding of the world. But I'm here to tell you that this is not an ending but a new beginning. As he spoke, Mike used his connection to the elementals to begin repairing the damage done to Los Angeles. Buildings reformed, fires extinguished, the very air cleared of smoke and debris. The beings you've seen as destroyers can also be creators, Mike continued. They are as much a part of this world as we are, and together we can usher in an era of recovery and growth unlike anything we've ever seen. Around the world, elementals began to reveal themselves, not as terrifying monsters, but as beings of beauty and power, helping to restore damaged ecosystems and clean polluted areas. As his message concluded, Mike felt the strain of maintaining his expanded form. He had pushed the limits of his transformation, and he could feel himself beginning to burn out. With the last of his strength, he turned back to where he knew Sarah was waiting. It's done, he said, his voice growing weak. But I don't know if I can come back. He felt Sarah's presence grow stronger, her love and determination cutting through the chaos of his fading consciousness. Yes, you can. Her voice came through, clear and strong. Follow my voice, Mike. Come back to me. Mike focused on her words, using them as a guide through the swirling energies of the elemental plane. Slowly, painfully, he felt himself coalescing, his human form taking shape once more. With a final surge of effort, Mike opened his eyes, finding himself back on the rooftop where it had all began. Sarah was there, holding him tightly, tears streaming down her face. You did it, she whispered. You beautiful, reckless idiot. You actually did it. Mike managed a weak smile. We did it, he corrected her. I couldn't have done any of this without you. As the sun began to rise over a transformed Los Angeles, Mike and Sarah held each other, watching as elementals and humans alike began the process of rebuilding. The world had changed irrevocably, but for the first time in a long while there was hope. Mike had embraced the fire, had become the phoenix rising from the ashes of the old world. And now, with Sarah by his side, and a new understanding between humans and elementals, he was ready to help shape whatever came next. The dawn of a new age had arrived, bright with promise and burning with potential. The world had changed dramatically in the weeks following Mike's transformation and global address. Elementals now walked openly among humans, helping to rebuild cities and restore ecosystems. But for Sarah Reeves, none of that mattered. Her world had shrunk to the size of a hospital room, where Mike lay motionless, showing no signs of waking. Come on, Mike, she whispered, clutching his hand. You've got to come back to me. The door opened, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered, her face a mask of professional concern. Any change? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah shook her head, not taking her eyes off Mike's face. Nothing. It's like he's not even there anymore. Doctor? Rodriguez checked Mike's vitals, her brow furrowing. His physical condition is stable, but his brain activity is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if his consciousness is elsewhere. Sarah's head snapped up. Elsewhere? You mean? In the elemental plane, perhaps, Dr. Rodriguez finished. But that's just a theory. We're in uncharted territory here, Ms. Reeves. As if in response to their conversation, the flame-shaped scar on Mike's arm pulsed faintly. Sarah gasped, hope surging through her. Did you see that? She asked excitedly. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her scientific curiosity piqued. Fascinating. It seems there's still a connection to the elemental energies. Sarah stood up, determination blazing in her eyes. Then that's how I'll reach him. I'm going in after him. Ms. Reeves, I must advise against any rash actions, Dr. Rodriguez protested. We don't know the risks involved in... But Sarah was already moving, placing her hand over Mike's scar. She closed her eyes, focusing on the latent elemental energy within her own body. I'm coming for you, Mike, she murmured. Just hold on. With a burst of will, Sarah felt herself falling, tumbling through layers of reality. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a realm of pure energy. Swirling vortexes of fire, water, earth, and air surrounded her, constantly shifting and merging. Mike, she called out, her voice echoing strangely in this alien environment. Mike, where are you? A familiar presence brushed against her consciousness. Sarah? Mike's voice came, distant and fragmented. Is that really you? Sarah spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Yes, it's me. I'm here to bring you home, Mike. Home? The confusion in Mike's voice was palpable. I don't understand. I'm everywhere here. I'm part of everything. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the extent of Mike's dissolution. His consciousness had merged with the elemental plane itself, losing its individual identity. No, Mike, she said firmly. You're not just a part of this place. You're Mike Henderson. You're the man I love, the hero who saved our world. Remember who you are. As she spoke, Sarah began to see flickers of memory around her. Images of their time together, of the battles they'd fought, of the life they'd shared. She reached out, trying to gather these fragments of Mike's identity. Suddenly, a new presence made itself known. Sarah turned to see Ember, the elemental ally they'd made in Los Angeles. Flame touched one, Ember said, its voice a crackling whisper. You do not belong here. This realm will consume you if you stay too long. I'm not leaving without Mike, Sarah replied defiantly. Ember's form flickered as if sighing. The one you seek has become one with the elemental forces. To separate him now would be difficult. But not impossible, Sarah pressed. Ember seemed to consider for a moment. There is a way, but it is dangerous. The ancient ones used a ritual to bind elemental spirits to physical forms. It could be adapted to reunite your mate's consciousness with his body. Hope surged through Sarah. Tell me what I need to do. As Ember explained the ritual, Sarah felt the elemental energies around her growing more turbulent. She could sense Mike's presence, scattered and confused, being pulled in multiple directions. Mike, listen to me, she called out, focusing all her will on reaching him. I know you feel at peace here, but you're needed back home. I need you. Our world needs you. She began the ritual, her words echoing with power in the elemental plane. As she chanted, she could feel Mike's consciousness slowly coalescing, drawn by the strength of their connection. Sarah? His voice was clearer now, more focused. What's happening? I'm bringing you back, she replied, her voice strained with effort. But I need you to fight, Mike. Remember who you are. Remember us. As the ritual reached its climax, Sarah felt a tremendous pull. The elemental plane itself seemed to be resisting, reluctant to release its hold on Mike. In that moment of crisis, Sarah made a desperate gamble. She opened herself fully to the elemental energies, offering a part of herself in exchange for Mike. Take me instead, she cried out. Let him go and I'll stay in his place. No! Mike's voice rang out, suddenly strong and clear. With a surge of will, his fully formed consciousness burst into view. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me, Sarah. Never again. The elemental plane shuddered, and Sarah felt herself being flung backwards. She caught one last glimpse of Mike, his form blazing with renewed purpose, before everything went dark. Sarah gasped as she came back to herself in the hospital room. Dr. Rodriguez was at her side, looking alarmed. "Ms. Reeves, are you all right? You've been unresponsive for several minutes." But Sarah's attention was entirely focused on Mike. His eyes were open, alert, and aware for the first time in weeks. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You came for me." Tears of joy streaming down her face, Sarah threw her arms around him. "Always," she whispered. "I'll always come for you." As they embraced, both of their elemental scars glowed brightly, pulsing in unison. Dr. Rodriguez watched in amazement as Mike's vital signs strengthened, his body seeming to rejuvenate before her eyes. "It's a miracle," she breathed. Mike smiled, looking at Sarah with eyes that now held the wisdom of two worlds. "Not a miracle," he said softly. "Just love, the strongest force in any universe." As word spread of Mike's awakening, elementals and humans alike gathered outside the hospital, celebrating the return of the one who had bridged their worlds. And in that small hospital room, Mike and Sarah held each other, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges this new world might bring. The resurrection was complete, but their journey was far from over. A new chapter was beginning, not just for them, but for all of humanity and elemental kind. And together, they would write it, one day at a time. The sun was setting over a changed Los Angeles as Mike and Sarah stood atop the rebuilt skyscraper where their journey had begun months ago. The city was a testament to the new alliance between humans and elementals. Gleaming structures of glass and steel intertwined with living architecture of fire, water, earth, and air. Mike took a deep breath, savoring the crisp evening air. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "I never thought I'd see anything like this." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "We did this, Mike. We changed the world." Before Mike could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Indeed you did, flame-touched ones." They turned to see Ember materializing beside them, its fiery form shimmering in the twilight. "Ember," Mike greeted the elemental with a nod. "What brings you here?" The elemental's form flickered, a gesture they had come to recognize as concern. "Trouble brews on the horizon. The balance we have achieved is fragile." Sarah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Things have been going so well." Ember's flame darkened. "Not all humans embrace change with open arms, and not all elementals have forgotten the long years of imprisonment. There are factions on both sides pushing for conflict." As if on cue, Mike's phone buzzed. It was a message from Agent Wilson. "Turn on the news. Now." Mike pulled out his tablet, bringing up a live news feed. The headline made his heart sink. "Anti-elemental protests turn violent in multiple cities." The newscaster's voice filled the air. Tensions have escalated as protests against elemental integration have turned violent in several major cities. In New York, a group calling themselves Humanity First clashed with elemental peacekeepers, resulting in significant property damage and several injuries. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Mike muted the feed, his expression grim. "This is bad. If this spreads, everything we've worked for could unravel." Sarah's eyes flashed with determination. "We won't let that happen. We've come too far." Ember nodded in agreement. "But how do we proceed? The delicate trust between our kinds hangs by a thread." Mike was silent for a moment, his mind racing. Then, his eyes lit up with an idea. "We need to show them, not just tell them, but show them what we can accomplish together." "What do you have in mind?" Sarah asked, recognizing the look of inspiration on Mike's face. "A demonstration," Mike replied, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "A massive, coordinated effort to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. Climate change, pollution, natural disasters. We'll show them how humans and elementals working together can solve issues that neither could handle alone." Ember's form brightened. "An ambitious plan, flame-touched one, but how will you convince both sides to participate?" Mike smiled, a hint of his old confidence returning. We'll start small, with the allies we trust. Then we'll let the results speak for themselves. Over the next few days, Mike, Sarah, and Ember worked tirelessly to put their plan into action. They reached out to sympathetic government officials, progressive elemental leaders, and influential public figures. Their first target, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. On a bright morning a week later, a flotilla of ships gathered at the edge of the massive collection of marine debris. News cameras broadcasted the event live around the world. Mike stood on the deck of the lead ship, Sarah at his side. He took a deep breath and addressed the gathered crowd and the millions watching at home. Today, we take the first step towards a true partnership between humans and elementals, he began. For decades, we've struggled to clean up this environmental disaster. Today, we'll show you what we can accomplish together. At his signal, teams of humans and elementals sprang into action. Water elementals created massive whirlpools concentrating the debris. Fire elementals incinerated non-recyclable plastics with pinpoint accuracy. Earth elementals compressed and reshaped recyclable materials, while air elementals helped control the smoke and fumes. Human workers coordinated the efforts using advanced technology to sort and process the collected materials. Within hours, visible progress was being made on a problem that had seemed insurmountable for years. As the day wore on, news of their success spread. Mike's phone was flooded with messages from officials and elemental leaders around the world, eager to implement similar programs in their regions. By sunset, when the teams took a break to rest and regroup, the transformation was staggering. A vast swath of the garbage patch had been cleared, with minimal environmental impact. Sarah found Mike standing at the ship's railing, gazing out at the cleaner ocean. "You did it," she said softly, wrapping an arm around his waist. Mike shook his head. "We did it. All of us. Together." He turned to her, his eyes shining with emotion. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. Think of what else we could accomplish." Their moment was interrupted by Agent Wilson, who approached with a tablet in hand. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing the device to Mike. It showed live feeds from cities around the world. The violent protests had transformed into peaceful gatherings. Humans and elementals stood side by side, watching the cleanup effort and discussing how they could implement similar programs in their own communities. "Public opinion is shifting," Wilson said, a rare smile on his face. "Your little demonstration here has gone viral. People are starting to see the possibilities." Mike felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by caution. "It's a good start," he agreed, "but we can't let up. There's still so much work to do." As if sensing his thoughts, Ember materialized beside them. "The path ahead is long, flame-touched ones," the elemental said. "But today, you have kindled a spark of hope in many hearts." Sarah nodded, her expression determined. "Then we'll nurture that spark. We'll turn it into a flame that lights the way forward." As night fell, the ships lit up the darkness, their lights reflecting off the now cleaner water. Mike stood with Sarah and Ember, watching as humans and elementals continued to work together in harmony. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. The wounds of the past wouldn't heal overnight, and there would always be those who resisted change. But for the first time since this journey began, Mike felt truly confident about the future. They had returned from the brink, not just him personally, but their entire world. They had been given a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite the relationship between humanity and the elemental forces of nature. As he looked out at the collaborative effort unfolding before him, Mike made a silent vow. They would not waste this chance. Together, they would build a world where the line between human and elemental blurred, where the strengths of both were combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The return was complete. Now, the real work could begin. 1 year had passed since the Great Pacific cleanup, and the world had transformed in ways few could have imagined. Cities now bustled with a harmonious blend of human and elemental activity, while vast stretches of once polluted wilderness thrived under the joint care of both species. Mike and Sarah stood atop the newly constructed Harmony Tower in New York. a massive structure that seamlessly integrated traditional architecture with living elemental components. As they gazed out at the cityscape, where fire elementals powered clean energy plants and water elementals purified the rivers, Mike couldn't help but smile. "It's amazing how far we've come," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand. "We've made real progress, but we can't get complacent. There's still work to be done." As if on cue, Ember materialized beside them, its fiery form flickering with urgency. "Flame-touched ones," it said. "We have a situation." Mike's expression turned serious. "What's wrong, Ember?" "A group of rogue elementals has taken control of a dormant volcano in Hawaii," Ember explained. "They threaten to trigger an eruption unless their demands are met." Sarah's eyes widened. "What demands?" "They wish for elementals to rule over humans," Ember said, its flame dimming with disapproval. "They believe cooperation is weakness, that we should assert our dominance." Mike's jaw clenched. "And let me guess, there's a human faction that's not too happy about this." Ember nodded. "The human military mobilizes as we speak. If they engage the rogue elementals, it'll undo everything we've worked for," Sarah finished. Mike took a deep breath, centering himself. "All right, we need to move fast. Ember, can you get us to Hawaii?" The elemental's form brightened. "It would be my honor." In a flash of heat and light, they found themselves on the slopes of Mauna Loa. The air was thick with sulfur, and the ground trembled ominously beneath their feet. At the volcano's rim, they could see a group of elementals, beings of fire and earth, their forms pulsing with barely contained power. Facing them was a line of military vehicles and troops, weapons at the ready. "We need to defuse this before it explodes," Mike said. "Sarah, you try to reason with the elementals. I'll talk to the military. Ember, stand by in case we need to intervene quickly." They split up, each approaching their respective groups. Sarah advanced towards the elementals, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Brothers and sisters," she called out, her voice carrying on the wind. "Why do you threaten the balance we've worked so hard to create?" A large earth elemental stepped forward, its voice rumbling like an avalanche. "Balance? You call this balance? We are meant to be forces of nature, not gardeners and construction workers." Meanwhile, Mike approached the military line. A stern-faced general met him halfway. "Mr. Henderson," the general said, his voice clipped, "I hope you're here to tell me you can put a stop to this nonsense." Mike held the general's gaze. "I'm here to prevent a catastrophe, General, but escalating to violence will only make things worse." Back on the elemental side, Sarah was making progress. "You are forces of nature," she agreed with the earth elemental. "But nature isn't just about destruction. It's about creation, growth, and balance. Working with humans doesn't diminish your power, it gives it purpose." A fire elemental joined the conversation, its voice crackling with skepticism. "And what of the humans who still fear and hate us? Who would see us bound or destroyed?" On the human side, Mike was facing similar concerns from the general. "These creatures are too powerful to be left unchecked," the general insisted. "How long before more of them decide they want to rule instead of cooperate?" Mike's eyes flashed with intensity. "The same could be said of humans with too much power, General. The solution isn't control or dominance, it's understanding and balance." As tensions rose on both sides, the ground began to shake more violently. Ember appeared between the two groups, its voice booming with authority. "Enough. Look around you." All eyes turned to the elemental. Ember's form expanded, creating a panoramic vision of the world as seen through elemental senses. They saw the intricate web of life, the flow of energies between all living things and the elements themselves. "This is the true nature of our world," Ember declared. "Humans and elementals are but threads in a greater tapestry. To tear it apart is to doom us all." The vision faded, leaving both sides in stunned silence. Mike seized the moment, addressing everyone present. "A year ago, we stood on the brink of destruction," he began. We chose a different path, a path of cooperation and understanding. It hasn't been easy and we still have a long way to go, but look at what we've accomplished already. Sarah joined him, her voice ringing out clear and strong. We've cleaned oceans, restored forests, revolutionized clean energy. We've done things neither humans nor elementals could have achieved alone. But it's not just about big, world-changing projects, Mike continued. It's about the small moments too. Humans and elementals working side by side, learning from each other, forming friendships and even families. The tension in the air began to dissipate as both sides contemplated their words. The lead Earth elemental stepped forward, its form shrinking to a more approachable size. Perhaps we have been too hasty, it rumbled. We forgot the joy of creation in our anger. The general lowered his binoculars, signaling his troops to stand down. It seems we all needed a reminder of what's at stake, he admitted. As the two sides began to cautiously mingle, Mike, Sarah, and Ember shared a relieved look. That was too close, Sarah murmured. Mike nodded, running a hand through his hair. We need to do more. Education, cultural exchange programs, platforms for open dialogue between humans and elementals. It will take time, Ember cautioned. Old fears and prejudices do not disappear overnight. No, Mike agreed. But every crisis we overcome, every problem we solve together, brings us one step closer to true harmony. As they worked to fully defuse the situation and begin the process of reintegrating the rogue elementals, the sun began to set over Mauna Loa. The sky blazed with color, a testament to the beauty that could arise when different elements worked in concert. Later that evening, as Mike and Sarah prepared to return to New York, they paused to watch the stars come out. The night was alive with tiny lights, some stars, some fireflies, and some small fire elementals dancing on the breeze. Do you think we'll ever really achieve balance? Sarah asked softly. Mike put his arm around her, considering the question. I think balance isn't a destination. It's a journey, something we have to work at every day. But as long as there are people, human and elemental, willing to put in that work, there's hope. As if in agreement, a chorus of gentle rumbles and flickers came from the elements around them. The wind carried the distant sound of humans and elementals singing together in the village below. Mike and Sarah stood there, guardians of two realms, watching over a world learning to live in harmony. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where the balance would be tested. But they also knew that they wouldn't face those challenges alone. As the last light faded from the sky, Mike squeezed Sarah's hand. Ready for whatever comes next? He asked. Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Always, she replied, together. And so, as one chapter closed, another began. The story of humans and elementals was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But with understanding, compassion, and a commitment to balance, they would write that story together one day at a time.